Good morning. This is the YouTube channel of the Study IAS, an institute for IAS. Today we are going to discuss Union Budget 2021-2022. Myself, Aman Jha. So let's start the session. One thing to remember: this is the Union Budget for financial year 22. Okay. Though we are only in February of 21, but the budget belongs to financial year 2022. This is the short form of writing it. So let's begin. Look, a simple thing. In the session on economic survey, we had discussed that who prepares and presents survey, because a similar question had been asked about who prepares the budget. Budget division of Department of Economic Affairs, same department releases economic survey as well. Okay, there are other departments in Ministry of Finance, Department of Revenue, Department of Expenditure, Department of Financial Services, etc. So your answer, if though it's very unlikely that the question would be repeated, but the idea is you should know which department presents. Okay, look, budget is it would be rather simplistic to say that budget is simply an economic document. It is perhaps more political than economic. There is, in the media, newspapers, students, public in general, everybody picks up nuggets from the budget depending upon their own, biases and inclinations, and they run with it. Often major announcements are made in the budget. Often we see that stock market, Sensex, etc., they undergo rapid rise or rapid decline, bearish or bullish, as you say, just because of a simple announcement like retrospective taxation, GAR, etc. Sometimes some things are announced in the budget, but then they face so much backlash that they have to be rolled back. For example, last year they had announced a provision for borrowing in foreign denominated bonds, foreign currency bonds. Why? Because there was an in general decline. Even before the COVID, there was a decline in economy. So, but then there was so much bureaucratic and intellectual pushback. Some of the leading economists suggested that there is too much risk. So it was gently rolled back, never discussed again, though very widely touted in the immediate aftermath of budget. So budget is a political document as well as an economic document. And therefore, it has an impact on society, but we should not take it too seriously. Why? Because budget is essentially an estimate. See, whenever a budget is released, there are three kinds of figures. BE, called budget estimate. This will be for financial year 2022. Then there is RE, revised estimate of previous year, and that means financial year 21. And then there will be actuals of financial year 20. Though even actuals sometime undergo minor revision later. Okay, so there are three sorts of figure in a budget document. Now, significance of the budget. As I said, these are projections, estimates. That means they can undergo, though they often go small changes, and in the events like COVID-19, they can undergo major changes, as we will see how and what kind of changes have been there. Okay, projections on growth, deficits, new policies, schemes, etc. So a budget speech by finance minister is not only an occasion to present an account, it is an occasion to make new policy statements, new scheme announcements as well. Okay. Also, it's perhaps unique to India, perhaps, that the Constitution of India itself talks about budget. Though it doesn't use the term budget, it says annual financial statement in Article 112. Annual financial statement. Budget is a colloquial term for in this thing. Also, presentation of budget is a tool of parliamentary accountability of the executive. Union executive is subjected to accountability to parliament, which is a co-equal branch of the government. Then it is accountable to people. Among many kinds of accountability, the fiscal accountability is a very important tool. Okay. How parliament holds government accountable? By passing the budget. Now, the difference between India and other parliamentary democracies, or rather the difference is more clear in the case of presidential democracy like USA. In case of India, since we have a rule of majority, so it is guaranteed that the ruling government will have an effective majority in parliament. Right now it's a rather brute majority, so it's very rare that they come across any resistance from lower house of the parliament. And since most of the budget is in the nature of money bill, therefore the role of Rajya Sabha, the upper house, is very limited anyway. So the one chamber that can really cause you problems has no role or very little role. And the one chamber that has more role it's normally in the hands of executive anyway. Such is the nature of parliamentary democracy. Whereas in a presidential democracy in, like, say, USA, see, right now in USA what has happened after these elections, that both president almost and both the houses of their Congress is in the hands of Democrat. But some time back, during the presidency of Trump, there was a Republican president, lower house was Democrat controlled and upper house was Republican controlled. So it was a perfect recipe for a logjam. They would bicker and disagree on almost everything. Okay, nothing would get passed. There will be frequent government shutdowns where government activities will be reduced to minimum. So this is a slight difference between the budget passing procedure in parliamentary and presidential democracies. So remember, passing the budget and budget itself is a very political exercise. See, we don't have this thing in India, but there is a thing in USA called Congress Budget Office, CBO. What CBO does in USA, and some of the parliamentarians and commentariats in India have also been demanding that we need such an office in India. It's a non-partisan body, rather a bureaucratic body, and it evaluates the outcome, output, impact of each and every measure of the government. Okay. For example, something like an outcome budget. For example, you are going to announce a new scheme. Okay, you announce a new scheme, something like a farm law. Okay, which is very controversial right now. So what would it do? It will go into the provisions of it. Okay, it will go into the provisions of food subsidy. Any reduction or increase, it will go into the provisions of Manrega and talk about, look, if there is any this much increase in the allocation, then this much people, these many people will get more employment, etc., etc. So we don't have such offices in India. That role is partly performed by the standing committees of the parliament, but their nature of activity is very different from CBO. Also, things like plan and non-plan. See, India started its independent life post 1947 with a Nehruvian economic model, and Nehruvian economic model borrowed this idea of planning from USSR. Now USSR was a command economy, a perfect command economy, totalitarian, but in India we had democratic planning. So we had from first 5-year plan to 12th 5-year plan. However, that concept of planning was abolished, planning commission was abolished. Therefore, this classification between plan and non-plan expenditure was abolished as well, because it was very superficial, if you say, because say you made a planned expenditure, you talked about a highway or a dam and you allocated this much money, but a lot of maintenance goes on into it, cost overruns, etc. So the difference between plan and non-plan expenditure was anyway a very minor one, a very thin one. You have to make contributions on a consistent basis. But the more important reason was the abolition of 5-year plans. Then This difference has been retained, and it must be retained because it is not about political economy. This is about accounting. This is an accounting practice that you separate between capital account and revenue account. Capital receipts, capital expenditure, revenue receipts, revenue expenditure. And what is the difference between them? We shall see in later slides. Also, we used to have a railway budget. Normally, railway budget was presented a few days before the union budget. However, that practice has also been abolished and it has been merged with the union budget. It was a pre-independence practice, continued rather as a tradition than without any actual significance at this point. Now, look, there could be a mains question, there could be prelims question as well, and we shall see both kinds of questions during the course of this lecture. Draw a comparison between the budgetary powers of Indian Parliament and American Congress. Okay, as we discussed a short while back, that India is a parliamentary democracy and USA is a presidential democracy. The first difference is that the separation of power in a presidential democracy is complete, whereas in a parliamentary democracy it is partial. Okay. Also, one major difference, as we discussed previously, is that see, budget is a tool of fiscal accountability of executive to the legislature. This is common across the countries. Passing a budget is an important event in the political calendar of each and every democratic country. There is nothing new to that. However, depending upon the nature of that democracy, the extent of fiscal accountability varies. In the case of USA, it is much higher, to the extent that it is more of a partisan politics thing. Rather than holding the executive accountable, it is held at a ransom. Sometimes some of the activities that if you don't agree to this thing, then we won't agree to your proposal. Therefore, we have a lockdown. They have a frequent, especially whenever they have a president from one party and a Congress controlled by another party, this lockdown is very, very common. Shutdown, rather, sorry, they use the word shutdown of a government, very common there. However, in the case of India, since Parliament, Lok Sabha has a major role in passing the budget, but it can be very easily managed by Council of Ministers, executives, and Rajya Sabha has a very limited role in passing of budget. If you recall correctly, Rajya Sabha in certain areas like constitutional amendment has equal role as the Lok Sabha. However, but in areas like passing money bills, it has a very, very limited role. So the extent of fiscal accountability in the case of India is rather limited. Also, we don't have bodies like CBO. So that expert input is, I would say, relatively lacking. So these are the differences, and around these things you can construct your answer. In introduction, you can write that passing a budget is an essential component of fiscal accountability of executive to the union. However, the extent of control varies. In the case of USA, the control is much tighter and much professional. In the case of India, that control is rather limited. Also, comment over the effectiveness of fiscal accountability of executive to the parliament, Indian Parliament. Same answer. You can say that the budget we don't have bodies like CBO. Lok Sabha is normally, since it's a majority government concept in a parliamentary democracy, so it's very easy to pass the budget in Lok Sabha. Due to the complexity and enormity of the budgeting process, the concepts like guillotine motion, guillotine cut motion, etc. are used very frequently. So very little is discussed. Often the political activities or the political environment overshadows the budget passing procedure. For example, what happened that in recent times, due to the ongoing agitation about farm laws, almost all the parties, opposition as well as government, are focusing on that issue rather than discussing the substantive issues of budget. And the reason, perhaps another reason for that might be that there is not, if you look closely, there is no real controversy in a budget. I mean, if Corona has hit, then your deficit is bound to rise. You can't do much about it. If there is no demand for private investment and public expenditure, then there has to be a government expenditure. So actually, the controversy in actual budget is very less. Ideas like Atmanirbhar Bharat. In last lecture, we had talked about Atmanirbhar China. So this is very common across countries. And as we see in lecture, in consequent slides, that the ideas of Atmanirbhar Bharat are not new. Maybe only the slogan is new. Now, let's look at the parliamentary process behind passing a budget. Now, see, if you look at the newspapers, there's a lot of economy, this scheme, that tax deduction, that idea, that subsidy, this new scheme, etc. There's a lot of that in newspapers. What is very little is the parliamentary process behind it. However, you being students, you should focus more on the parliamentary processes, the constitutional provisions, the parliamentary provisions, and the broad trends. So let's start with the parliamentary process. How it starts? It starts with a budget speech. Finance minister makes a budget speech in lower house, and at the end of the speech, budget is presented to both the houses. Then what happens? A general discussion for few days takes place, and at the end of it, finance minister has a right to reply to that budget. Okay? Also, see, motion of thanks is different from general discussion on budget. Why? Because motion of thanks takes place in response to the president's address at the beginning of each financial year. Okay, so and that takes place separately in both the houses, and in passing motion of thanks separately, role of Rajya Sabha is almost equal to Lok Sabha. They pass it separately. This is their own response to that. However, it often happens close to general discussion on the budget. After this process, you can say parliament would be adjourned for 3 to 4 weeks. Why? Because during that period, department related standing committees undertake a detailed study for demand for grants. What are demand for grants? We shall study in later slides. After that, their report along with demands for grants are presented to Lok Sabha. Each and every demand for grant is voted separately. And after that, all the demand for grant, and here the concepts of cut motion come into picture. This is the point where a spirited opposition, if it has enough strength, can hold the government accountable. There is the idea of policy cut motion, there is the idea of notional cut motion, there is idea of, a separate kind of see, the idea is ki if opposition has enough numbers and it launches a spirited attack on the government, this is the point they can really hold government to the accountable. However, not much happens here. It's rather perfunctory at this point. And then all those demand for grants are, consolidated into one appropriation bill. At this stage, since demand for grant has already been voted, so they don't go into the nitty-gritties of each and every demand. They just focus on whether we pass the appropriation bill or not, and that usually gets passed. And after that, see, appropriation loosely is about expenses. Government seeks approval to appropriate money from Consolidated Fund of India to spend. This is about spending. And after that, finance bill. This is about income. See, it is rather indicative of how the government works. First, talk about expenses, then talk about income. Individuals, on the other hand, first have to think about income, then they talk about expenditure. After that, you have finance bills, finance bill. Here you have different taxation proposals, etc., and that also easily passes. Then some of the funds, and they have constitutional and legal backing both, are associated, rather closely associated with the budget making process. Consolidated Fund, Contingency Fund, Public Account of India, Money Bill, GST, GST Council. See, GST Council is also a constitutional body. What is Money Bill? Article 110 of the Constitution gives a detailed definition of what is a money bill. Okay. Both appropriation bill and finance bill qualify as money bill. And as we know, the role of Rajya Sabha is very, very limited in passing the money bill, and therefore it's very difficult for them to hold government accountable. They can only discuss demand for grants. They cannot vote on them. Even Lok Sabha cannot vote on those grants which are charged on the consolidated funds. What is a charge fund? We will see right now. Also, there is another idea, that difference in market borrowings of states and center, and part 12 of the constitution, which is about the financial relationship between center and state. See, both governments, state and center, borrow from the market, but there is slight difference in their borrowing. Okay, for example, government can borrow short term as well as long term. Okay, but state government cannot issue treasury bills. So I think in 2018 there was a question on this issue, that can state governments borrow on short term basis by issuing treasury bills. The answer is no. Apart from that, you have WMA, ways and means of advances. Okay, it has separate provisions that how interest would be charged on it. So the idea here is that I want to emphasize that the budget from a student's perspective is as much about polity as about economy. Now, there could be a prelims question. In fact, there have been some. There was one on FRBM committee, also known as N.K. Singh committee. They asked about the different goals set by it, that how much there should government debt to public debt should be, what should be the share of center, what should be share of states, etc. Ways and means of advance. In recently, since governments had to, both at the central and state level, had to borrow a lot from the market, from the RBI, from wherever they could. So this thing was in news. State development bonds, what we talked previously, that the state governments cannot borrow on short term, they have to borrow on long term. So those bonds are called state development bonds. And treasury bills, short term securities of central government. Mains question, there is still a large, see here they could clearly frame a prelims question on the basis of the difference between these two, state development bonds and T-bills. And similarly, they can, if they want to spice it up, they could, add the concepts of ways and means of advance here as well, because here RBI comes into picture. Here monetary policy rates come into picture. Okay, that how the interest rate of ways and means of advance are pegged to the policy rates. Here the fiscal discipline comes into picture. The idea of a deficit financing, that means print money and so these ideas can be easily used to frame a question, and any standard book on economy and polity discuss these concepts. Mains question, there is still a large scope to improve the fiscal federalism in India. Fiscal federalism, first of all, what is political federalism, and similarly same concept essentially, the relationship between center and state in terms of money. Who raises taxes, what sort of taxes they are allowed to raise, what sort of taxes do they actually raise, how do they help the urban local bodies, rural local bodies, how the structure, how the relationship is skewed in the favor of center. For example, though under Finance Commission recommendation, 42% of the devolvable pool of central resources go to the states, but what center does, it imposes cess and surcharge on, for example, education cess, etc. And these are not shared with the states. So critics argue that due to cess and surcharge, this figure actually comes down to 31-32%. Okay. So also we know that since GST, whatever limited fiscal autonomy the states had, they have given up. Now an argument could be made about the feasibility and desirability of that, but this is the situation right now. So how there is still a large scope to improve fiscal federalism in India? How? You can say that maybe central government should strictly focus on the items in union list only and devolve rest of the money so that states can run their own schemes on the subjects in concurrent list and state list. You can say that the idea of GST council, the GST council should be more democratized. You can say that center should simply devolve more funds from 42%, they should go to 50%, etc. You can give such ideas here. The first, you show the cracks and the problems in fiscal federalism. For example, if you recall this time that due to the shortfall in GST compensation collection, center could not give money to the states, and states were reminding center that look, you have a constitutional duty to help us for at least first 5 years, and some of the states are saying that no, extend that provision for 10 years. Why? Because they don't have any rather independent fundraising power. Income tax, corporation tax, all these major heads, custom duties are with the center. What do they have? They had sales tax, which they have merged with GST. So they don't have autonomy to meet the circumstances which will be unique to the states. They had one thing is liquor, but for some political reasons, the governments often take a high moral stand and ban liquor sales. So what happens that the one area where they have autonomy, they intentionally let that go, and there are political moral reasons behind it which can be discussed separately. Then they have agricultural income, they don't want to tax it. Often it has been found that urban local bodies and rural local bodies in many states have been allowed to levy and collect taxes, but due to their unique governance related issues, they still depend on the state and central funds. So you can raise such issues, and then after highlighting the cracks in fiscal federalism, you can give your suggestions. You can talk about that the idea of GST council should be extended to other areas also. Okay, now let's talk about some of the funds. Consolidated Fund of India. Article 266 of the Constitution. So it is a constitutional fund. Okay, that itself, Article 266 says that it creates the consolidated fund. Okay, all revenues received, loans raised, and recoveries of loans granted, it could be granted to us, to states, local bodies, foreign government, anyone, etc., form the Consolidated Fund of India. That means all the receipts from these go to CFI. All expenditure is incurred from it, and no amount can be drawn from CFI except as provided by law. Now, what law provides? That you will need a parliamentary approval For that, you have budget, and in budget you have demands for grants. So this is that. Now the article in the Constitution is not written exactly verbatim as it is, but we have shortened it slightly. Okay, so this is where the parliamentary fiscal accountability comes into picture, that no amount can be withdrawn. And then there are different kind of other process as well. You have supplementary grants, for example, you have additional grants, you have supplementary grants, you have vote on account. Now the idea of vote on account has become rather redundant because the budgetary process has been brought back. Okay, there are such other instruments as well. Then we have Article 267. See, Article 266 creates consolidated fund, but Article 267 authorizes creation of a contingency fund. So it says that Parliament can create a contingency fund. Now, what is the meaning of word contingency? Rather, an unforeseen circumstance, right? So it will be a contingency fund placed at the disposal of President, run by the Finance Ministry bureaucracy, to facilitate urgent expenditure. This is the contingency. When we say contingency fund, no, this is the contingency. Parliament approves ex post facto. That means after the expenditure has been incurred, to draw from CFI. That means, okay, there is a certain fund in contingency fund. You use that fund to, make advances or pay for this anything, and then Parliament approves the withdrawal of same amount from consolidated fund back into contingency fund. So that the idea is contingency fund is continuously replenished from the funds from the CFI. Okay. However, so parliamentary approval is used here. The corpus of contingency fund is at 500 crore. So it is largely a token fund, because even some of the rather small funds like disaster management fund have thousands of crores. So it's a rather small fund. In any way, the government finance has become so smooth in the age of IT that the idea of urgent expenditure is not that relevant anymore. Then you have public accounts. Public account is also formed. Look, okay. What it consists of? Provident funds, small saving collections are examples of monies kept in public account. These funds have to be paid back. See, this is the thing. They have to be paid back and don't require parliamentary nod. Say small saving collections, you have provident fund. You know the concept of provident fund. You know the concept of small saving certificate, etc. So mostly these transactions are, these instruments are transactional in nature, that some amount has been collected which has to be paid back. Okay. The concept of paying back with or without interest. These are not fees. Okay. You don't think that, okay, I paid a challan for not wearing a mask or a helmet, so that might go to public account. No, that won't be paid back. Okay. So that will form part of consolidated fund here. But suppose you bought a National Small Saving Certificate, Kisan Vikas Patra, you invested in other small saving investment schemes. So that money goes into the public account, because that will eventually be returned to you at the date of maturity. They don't require parliamentary note when they have to be paid back, which is obtained only when money from CFI, consolidated fund, is kept in the public account for expenditure on specific objects. So if there is a head of expenditure for which money is brought from consolidated fund, their parliamentary approval will be needed. So idea is, wherever money goes into or comes out of consolidated fund, there only parliamentary approval will be needed. Okay, the list of budget documents presented to the parliament besides the finance minister's budget speech is given below. Annual financial statement, demands for grant, finance bill, statements made under FRBM Act. These two statements are made. Expenditure budget, receipt budget, expenditure profile, budget at a glance, memorandum explaining the provisions in the financial bill, outcome monitoring framework, key features of budget, and implementation of budget announcements in the past. See, this second half, this will be mostly covered through budget speech. Apart from budget at a glance, rest of them will be covered through the budget speech. And we shall see up to here one by one. Okay. There is, for example, there is a very slight difference between expenditure budget and expenditure profile. So they need not be emphasized that closely. It's very unlikely that there will be one question. There will be something dedicated to that. So we should focus on this much one by one, and then we will go through these through budget speech. Okay, first, annual financial statement. This word is mentioned in Constitution. Constitution says that it is the duty of President to present an annual financial statement to both houses of the Parliament regarding the estimated receipts and expenditure of the Government of India for that financial year. He has some other responsibilities in this regard. For example, that the annual financial statement has to show the capital, the expenditure on revenue account from capital account. He has to show separately which expenses are charged on CFI and which are met from CFI. Now, what is difference between charged and met expenditures? That charged expenditures are not votable. They should be voted only when they are about to be reduced or decreased, reduced or increased. They would not be voted annually. The expenses of President and his office, Vice President, his office, Speaker, Deputy Speaker, Chairperson, Deputy Chairperson, CAG, Supreme Court judges, pensions of High Court judges, and other such expenditures which are charged on the CFI through a law, they constitute that category. So let's look at them. Now, AFS provided under Article 112 shows estimated receipts and expenses of government for, see, this is the financial year in relation to revised estimate of For financial year 2021, we have revised estimates RE, and for financial year 2022, we have budget estimates, as also AE, actual expenditure. Now, see, even this is not fully fixed. Even this can go small variations later. But this is much more certain than, say, a revised estimate or budget estimate for the FY20 under the three separate accounts. Which three separate accounts? We saw consolidated fund, contingency fund, and public accounts. You have to show separately receipts and expenditures on these three separate accounts. This is what the annual financial statement shows. Let's look at the articles of sub-articles, clauses of Article 112. One says, President shall, in respect of every financial year, cause to be laid before both the Houses of Parliament a statement of the estimated receipts and expenditures of the Government of India for that year, as we discussed previously. Look, this is a requirement of President. Now, clause 2, the estimates of expenditure in the annual financial statement shall show separately sums charged upon the consolidated fund, sums required to meet from the CFI, and shall distinguish expenditure on revenue account from other expenditures. Other is mainly now capital account only. So it only says that, look, you have to do two additional things apart from presenting an annual financial statement. You have to show which expenditure is charged. That means it will not be voted annually by lower house. Once a law is passed that this much expenditure is charged on this account, then it shall remain so. And which are to be met. I mean, for areas like salaries, expenses, for central sector schemes, state sponsor schemes, the devolution to states, finance commission grants, such other things which are to be met. And separate the capital and revenue account. Then third, the following expenditures shall be expenditure charged on the CFI. As we discussed, the expenditures of President and his office, Vice President and his office, Office of Speaker, Deputy Speaker, Chairperson, Vice Chairperson, CAG, the expenses of Office of CAG, Supreme Court judges, expenses of Supreme Court, and any of the expenses needed to meet any of the judgments, decrees and orders of judicial system, be it High Court, Supreme Court, even tribunals. Okay, and then such other expenses which are charged by a law, and that law will be a money bill under the Article 110. It gives a very detailed account of through 6 clauses that which of these will be money bills. Now, here comes the role of money bill and recent controversies about it. For example, some of the bills, now there are 3 kinds of bills: money bill and finance bill 1 and finance bill 2, and there have been some controversies about them in recent past. For example, the Aadhaar Act was passed as a money bill, okay, and it is still in court. The matter is sub judice, so perhaps we should not go into the details of what is the argument and counter argument in the case, but the point is that there is a bit too much discretion with speaker. All the speaker has to do is to sign, stamp it as a money bill. Then Rajya Sabha cannot question it. They can simply discuss it, and within 14 days they have to give back with or without recommendations, which may or may not be accepted by Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. There is nothing Rajya Sabha can do about it after that point. This is this, and then even President is not supposed to return money bill. You either give assent or reject. So there is lot of discretion here, and however the idea behind money bill is, the argument is that perhaps some of the bills which have very significant constitutional angles. For example, Aadhaar has a privacy angle. Okay, electoral bonds had very important electoral funding for political economy of the country. So there is this controversy going on about money bill, and it seems to me that in near future there might be some changes in how the power of speaker is exercised in this area. Now, as we saw that the constitution requires president to separate expenditure from revenue account from other accounts. Other is right now only capital account. So we shall see what is revenue receipt and expenditure and what is capital receipt and expenditure. Receipts, taxes, fees, receipts by government, mostly non-net. See, this part is very important. These are mostly non-debt incurring and non-asset sales, meaning any receipt of income which does not incur you debt. That means it should not be a loan. Also, it should not involve sale of assets. Say if you sold a particular land, or if you sold a particular PSC, public sector enterprise, or if you sold if you say sold bonds in the market, borrowings, etc. So these spectrum sales. Now spectrum, right now we might undertake 5G spectrum sale in later this year, so that would form a part of the capital account, because here you have given up an asset. Okay, so revenue account, the thumb rule is it should be non-debt incurring and non-asset sales. Now see, taxes, they are not incurring any debt and it is not a sale of assets. Fees, okay, you get your PAN card, Aadhaar card, so many, I mean countless government services, and for most of the services there is certain nominal fee. Then there are challans, service charges. Okay, right now we have a 2000 rupees fine for not wearing a mask. Okay, so such things. Expenditures, interest, subsidy, short-term expenditures mainly. Salaries, purchases, grant in aid, broadly those expenditures that don't create assets. Now you might make a philosophical argument that isn't a public servant an asset to the government. So if you are paying him salary, are you not creating an asset? There is a philosophical argument to be made here, but let's stick to the economic argument, which is unless you are creating a robust physical or social asset, for example like a hospital, like a even a aircraft. Right now we count even fighter aircrafts defense capital expenditure as part of capital, not revenue account. So you might say, what kind of asset is this? That's a separate argument, but broadly they don't create assets. Okay, all grants given to the states and union territories and other parties are also treated as revenue expenditure, even though, and this part is important, some of the grants may be used for creation of capital assets. So whatever grant or devolution government is undertaking, see that 42% figure, the part of the central pool of taxes which are shared between the center and states, currently 42% is given to the states. So that 42% does not form part of the consolidated fund, that 42% does not form part of the union budget. But still, Government of India through other finance commission grants, through central sector schemes, through central sponsored schemes, contribution to state disaster fund and many such other heads makes contribution to the states. So during these contributions, even if certain devolution or certain grants creates capital assets for state government, they shall still be counted as part of the revenue expenditure rather than capital expenditure. Why? Because that asset would not be on the books of central government. This is a purely accounting exercise. Now, grant in aid to the revenue, the real term, the long version of the word grant in aid is grant in aid to the revenue account of the states. This is the actual long term. Capital receipts and expenditures. As we said, receipts, loans, most important. Sale of assets, disinvestment. This year government is planning to go big on disinvestment, though then an argument could be made that since the market sentiments are so subdued, what is the point of selling assets right now? So it will entirely depend on the successes or how well the disinvestment program goes. Okay, sale of assets like spectrum sale, sale of land, leasing of assets lying with the central government. Expenditure, asset acquisition, roads, highways, hospitals, military tanks, aircraft carriers. Loans made to states union territories, corporations, etc. These form part of the capital receipt. See, the idea of current account and capital account is not only in the union budget, even in the concept of balance of payment in terms of external trade. You have capital account, you have current account. The current account, there you don't have revenue account, you have current account. Then you have current account, capital account, then you have, your treasury, etc. Demands for grants along with annual financial statement. What we saw here, that an annual financial statement is made, then there are demands for grants. So now we are going to look into what are demands for grants. Okay, demands for grants along with AFS. See, Article 113 of Constitution says that votable estimates of expenditure from CFI should be presented to both houses of presented to the Parliament along with annual financial statement. Votable parts, that means there are certain non-votable parts which we call expenditures charged. See, remember this, there are some expenditures which are given in Constitution itself that these shall be charged on the consolidated fund. The idea behind him is that we want those institutions like Office of President, Office of CAG, the Office of Speaker to be independent, to be rather aloof from the government. Therefore, the expenses of their offices have been charged on the Constitution. Then some other expenses can be charged on the Constitution by parliamentary law. Once a law declares that a certain expenditure is charged on the consolidated fund, then it would not be subjected to repeated voting annually. Okay, it shall stay fixed until it is again reduced or increased or even abolished. That is the only parliamentary law that will again interfere with it. It says that votable estimates of expenditure from CFI should be presented in the form of demands for grants. Okay. Normally there is one for each ministry, but there could be more than one. If you have too many departments and the role of those departments is very different from each other, there could be more than one demand for grant. Total 101 has been presented in this budget. The number can increase or decrease. Again, differentiated, though they say that they should be presented separately, but what happens actually is that within demand for grant for each ministry or department, these two are shown separately. That look, this much will be charged, this much is votable. So you can discuss both. You can discuss, but you can vote only on this one. DOG also shows that this much is revenue expenditure, this much is capital expenditure, and then what would be the grand total of 1 and 2 and 1 and 2. So this is how the demand for grant is structured. Then a finance bill. Finance bill was the third item. Also, before, let's say that once we have shown that there are 101 demand for grants, once all of them are passed, what actually happens that few of the important ones are discussed and voted on separately, and a certain time is fixed, say a month. Once that time period passes, and often a lot of demands for grants are not discussed by that time. So the idea of guillotine is used, okay, at that point, that they just simply pass it along with the rest of the DOG. A finance bill is presented. Also, once all those grants are passed, then they are brought together into one appropriation bill and it is passed again. A finance bill is presented under Article 110(1)(a). What it says, that imposition, abolition, remission, regulation, alteration of any tax would be a money bill. Okay, so a finance bill is a money bill in that sense. And since finance bill talks about the taxation proposals of the government, so it is a money bill. Detailing the taxes proposed in the budget, it also contains other provisions related to budget that could be classified as money bill. As we saw that some time back, Aadhaar Act was passed as a money bill. Okay. A finance bill is a money bill as defined in the Article 110 of the Constitution. Because what this says that imposition, there are actually total 6 provisions, 6 clauses, clause 1, clause sub clause A, sub clause B, etc. So the first one says that imposition, abolition, regulation, alteration, etc. will be called money bill. See, the reason we are not going into the details of how different sorts of money bill, as I said, there are 3 kinds. One mentioned in Article 110, second mentioned in Article 117 clause 1, third in Article 117 clause 3. The reason we are not going into the passing procedure of each and every one is that this lecture is primarily focused on budget. Okay, we are highlighting political points as far as we can. Statements under FRBM Act. Macroeconomic framework statement. This is the first one. There is another mainly two statements are given. So what is full form of FRBM? Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act. It brought a lot of discipline into government financing. Earlier it was a very common practice simply to print money to finance your deficit. Such fiscal profligacy has been controlled since this act, although the grand ideas on fiscal deficit that it should be brought in the range of 3%, it gets postponed on one account or the other, and now this idea has been postponed perhaps indefinitely, because right now we are saying that only in next 5 to 6 years we will come in the 4-5% category. Forget 3 right now for a while. The other important idea is debt to GDP ratio. Debt to GDP ratio. Through a recent amendment, FRBM Act mainly focuses on these two. Debt to GDP ratio. The NK committee said that we had discussed previously 60%, 40 center, 20 state. Okay. The macroeconomic framework statement is passed under, or rather presented under section 3 of the FRBM Act. Okay. Assessments of growth prospects and underlying assumptions. Media reported that survey has said that India will grow by almost 11%. Budget said something similar. So this is the part of FRBM Act that show the assessments of growth prospects and what are the underlying assumptions, that why you think that we will achieve 11% growth, because there will be for example a V-shaped recovery. For example, Atmanirbhar Bharat will bring this much increase in the growth prospects. For example, the national infrastructure pipeline will increase growth by this much. The improvement in outlook of external sector, external trade, the stability of exchange rate, such assumptions, the control on inflation, such assumptions are also presented along with growth prospects. The second statement under the FRBM Act is medium-term fiscal policy cum fiscal policy strategy statement. Okay, you can either call it medium-term fiscal policy statement or fiscal policy strategy statement. What it says, 3-year rolling targets for 6 specific indicators in relation to GDP. What are those 6 specific indicators? Fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, primary deficit, tax revenue, non-tax revenue, and central government debt. These 3 fiscal indicators are given on the basis of a 3-year rolling target. We shall see some of them separately in next slides, that what is a fiscal deficit, what is a revenue deficit, what is a primary deficit, etc. Expenditure budget. In expenditure budget, estimates made for a scheme are brought together from different demands for grants and shown on a net basis on revenue and capital account at one place. For example, you have a scheme of, say, Swachh Bharat Mission. Now we know it has an urban component and it has a rural component, right? Also, it is often linked with the Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana's rural component. Often it is linked with Manrega. In SBM, you have concepts like fecal sludge management. Fecal sludge management. You have components like solid waste management and liquid waste management. Now, for solid waste management, you will make you will introduce expenditure in the demand of for grant of urban ministry, okay, urban development ministry, because solid waste management is primarily waste collection, segregation, disposal. Such things are part of solid waste management, and often expenditures are added in the demand for grant of urban development ministry. But for constructing toilets, rural development ministry, then Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation, they also come into picture. So what happens is that often one scheme and the expenditure related to one scheme is distributed across demand for grants for separate ministries. Okay. What expenditure budget does, that it brings all the relevant components of a scheme under there is solid waste and there is liquid waste management. What it does, that it brings together different demands for grants and shown on a net basis on revenue and capital account. They give you a long chart that look, this much revenue, this much money will be spent on this scheme, this much will be on revenue account, and this much will be on capital account. Okay. Swachh Bharat Mission is one such example. There are many such examples. You have Jal Jeevan Mission, you have Manrega, you have food security. Okay. Okay. Then what it does, expenditure of each ministry and departments are classified under two broad umbrellas. One, center's expenditure, and transfers to states and union territories. In center's expenditure, there are three sub classifications. Establishment expenditure means procurement, salaries, maintenance, etc. Central sector scheme, and other central expenditure including those on CPSE. Now, what is a central sector scheme? You remember here 100% contribution is made by government. Now, in the umbrella transfers to states and UTs include three sub classification. What? Centrally sponsored. Now here two formulas are there. If you recall, one formula is, though these are most common, these are not the only formulas. One is 60-40, 60% by center, 40% by states, and one is 90-10. This is for special category states. Finance commission transfers. What are the finance commission transfers? See, this is not that 41%. Okay. Now it is 41%. Earlier it was 42 because 1% on behalf of J&K has been deducted. This is not here. There are other finance commission transfers. Transfers to urban local bodies, rural local bodies, contribution to state disaster fund, etc. This 41% does not form part of consolidated fund, does not form part of union budget. Remember, rest of the transfers, some of them are recommended by Finance Commission. There are constitutional provisions for them. They form part of the transfer to states and territories and other transfers to the states. Okay. To understand the objectives underlying the expenditure proposed for various schemes and programs in the expenditure budget, suitable explanatory notes are given in the volume. So, see, the idea, the reason I have kept this line is that don't think that by looking at just one or two lectures, your study of union budget is over. There are many other small areas. For example, from budget speech, we have only included those parts which are relevant, or rather there could be a question on the basis of it. But there are many details. For example, when they talk about highway infrastructure, they go into how we are doing new awarding new contracts for highways, how we are doing this scheme, how we have increased the corpus of that fund. So there are many other things, and apart from reading these or watching these lectures, you should read the budget, especially the budget speech. Receipt budget provides, so first we had expenditure budget, now we have receipt budget. Provides estimates of tax and non-tax revenue receipts and capital receipts. We have revenue receipts and capital receipts. What expenditure budget does? It brings different components of a single scheme from different demands for grants on one platform, and it says that look, under this scheme this much revenue expenditure will take place and this much capital expenditure will take place. Similarly, receipt budget brings together revenue receipts and capital receipts, trend of receipts and expenditure along with deficit indicators, the important ones: fiscal deficit, revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit, primary deficit, budget deficit, etc. Liabilities, guarantees given by the government, assets, etc. are also included in the receipt budget. Expenditure profile, that is also given here. So what is mainly included in it is that earlier when plan and non-plan, see, it's slightly different. This was expenditure budget, okay, this was expenditure budget. Then we had receipt budget, and this is expenditure profile. Now what a profile does, it gives different kinds of characterization. Earlier when we had plans, this was more important because it showed that this expenditure is planned, this expenditure is non-planned. Now only we have mainly two profiles, capital and current revenue. It also shows gross and net expenditure, because what happens, sometimes in a demand for grant of a ministry, there are certain expenditures charged and expenditures votable, but there are certain receivables also. Okay, a ministry might receive money on account of giving certain services, or it might receive transfers from some other ministries. So there are receivables also. So if you count both of them, then there will be the problem of double accounting. So what they show, that they show difference between gross and net expenditure on any items or any schemes or programs. Then they show expenditure variations, like the variation between revenue estimate, revised estimate and budget estimate. Okay, this year on account of corona pandemic, there are many schemes and programs where there were drastic changes in the actual amount, the amount budgeted and the actual amount spent. Then for example, in borrowing, huge borrowing in the areas of Manrega, huge sudden spike in the areas of food subsidy, very sudden spike. Then due to the border crisis in Eastern Ladakh, there was a sudden increase in the defense expenditure. So it shows the expenditure variations as well. Then gender budgeting, tribal sub schemes, scheduled caste, tribe sub schemes, etc. Such heads of expenditure are shown that this much we are spending on gender issues. Then tribal sub schemes, they show in each and every scheme which component of the scheme or to what extent that impacts the tribal. Similarly, the idea is of gender budgeting. Say for example, in right to education, okay, they will show that how much of the money we actually spent, or in scholarship, actually goes to the children or to girl children. In say Swachh Bharat mission, they will highlight that how much of money is actually helping improving the social situation of women. Then schemes like Ujjwala, schemes like Pehal, they will highlight that this much of the expenditure is directly impacting women and to what extent. So this is the idea of gender budgeting. Then you have memo means memorandum, explaining provisions of finance bill. Say you are raising a certain duty, why you raised it, you are reducing a certain duty, reduction of duty on gold import. So why you are doing these things, what are the rationale? So such things are explained in the finance bill. Okay, say suppose though this year they did not increase any tax substantially, there were talks of a corona cess on a wealthy, of things like wealth tax, etc. So they would give explanation behind it. They explained that why they are reducing the import duty on golds. So such memorandums. Then output outcome monitoring framework. There is a nuanced difference between output and outcome. Say under a scheme, you created certain number of hospitals, certain number of schools, okay, you built a highway, This was the output. But what was the outcome? Increase in literacy, reduction in mortality figures, child mortality, maternal mortality, improvement or reduction in logistics cost. That is the outcome. So, output outcome monitoring framework, that yes, we built these many schools, we built these many hospitals, we built this much length of highway, this was the output, and the outcome was this. Obviously, you want to improve that ratio, you want more bang for the buck, right? If you built 1 kilometer of highway, you want the logistics cost to come down by this much. If it hasn't, then you think, okay, maybe the quality of road wasn't good enough, or we did not do something else that would have contributed to it, right? For example, you built schools, but somehow you forgot to convince the parents to send their girls to the schools. So what would happen? There is output, you built schools in tribal area, but since due to lack of community outreach, the children are still not coming. So then you realize that maybe we need to do something more, things like behavioral change. For example, you say we built these many crores of toilets, but does it result in a commensurate reduction in open defecation? Certainly not. Why? Because there is a behavioral component to that, and you have to work on it. This is one of the reasons why they hire celebrities to do campaigns for that. Okay. So this is the difference between output and outcome. Ideally, you want maximum bang for the buck. The more output you give, the more outcome you want. And if there is a mismatch, you realize that maybe we need some tweaks and changes. Then key features of the budget, implementation of announcements, etc. These are part of the expenditure profile. Budget at a glance, we shall see important data and aggregates from that separately. It represents broad aggregates like what are the growth figures, what was the receipt, expenditure, what is different profiles of schemes. Focuses on trends. Okay, what you should do as a student, focus on trends rather than absolute numbers. Do not try to cram numbers, that how much money was allocated to defense, how much money was allocated to Manrega, what was the fiscal deficit 3 years back, what is the projected next year. Don't try to cram figures, understand the trends, because such questions have been there in prelims. They asked that the India's debt to GDP ratio has been consistently, or tax to GDP ratio has been consistently increasing or declining, etc. India's current account deficit has never been positive, etc. So they ask questions on trends rather than specific figures for any particular year. So focus on trends. Also, understand implications rather than figures. So if there has been a sudden spike, almost 10% fiscal deficit we have, almost. So don't remember, it's okay if you don't remember the exact figure, whether it is 9, 9.5 or 9.9, that's okay. But understand the implication. Okay, if government is saying that no, even next year we are not promising that we will suddenly come down to 4 or 5%. Next, for the budget estimate, they are saying they have a very sober figure. They are saying it will be 6.8%. So understand the implication of what they are saying. Understand that if there was a sudden sharp increase in Manrega allocation, or if there is if they have allocated 35,000 crore for vaccination, what is the implication of that, rather than remembering the exact figure. Okay. See, when it says that budget at a glance gives aggregates, these are the aggregates. What it does, as we said, look, actuals for 1920, though even they are subjected to slight variations sometime. Budget estimates. This was budget estimate. Then what happened? COVID hit, and all those figures went out of window. Then we have revised estimates and the budget estimates for next financial year. Okay, look at the revenue receipt. 20,20,000 crore was expected. How much came? 15,55,000 crore. Such a steep drop. Why? Because business activity came down to a grinding halt. Lockdowns. This is what we talk when we talk about implications. Now, how you can use these figures? You can say, suppose you are writing a mains answer, you can use this figure that look, government's receipt came down by this much. If you remember the figure, otherwise don't bother about it. Now, tax revenue. Okay, from 16,35,000 to 13,44,000. So this is how you look at the trends rather than absolute figures. Capital receipt. Now see, capital receipt from 10,21,000 crore to went up, such huge increase. from 10,21,000 crore to 18,95,000 crore. Why? Why such a huge increase? Almost double, from 10 lakh crore to 18 lakh crore. Why such an increase? Did we sell some? What happened in this period? Was it good? Was it bad? Was it convenient? Or was it a necessity? See what happened. Look at this figure. Borrowings. As we said, that capital receipts are either debt incurring or entail loss of or sale of assets. What happened? Government had to borrow significantly. Why? Precisely because of this reason. Because government's tax revenue fell so sharply that it had to borrow commensurately. However, in both the cases, they have presented a rather sober figure for next year. They are not claiming an immediate recovery to this level, because remember, they are saying that there will still be some contraction. Okay, despite a V-shaped recovery, there will still be some contraction, and since there will be a 7.7% contraction, next year's 11% growth would still not bring us back to this level. Still, it will be 17,88,000 crore. So yes, there will be some growth from here to here, but it would not bring us back to this level. That might take one more year if we sustain the recovery. Similarly, then they have what they have done. They have added 1 and 4 and given us total receipt. Total expenditure on revenue account. Remember, even the constitution says that expenditure on the revenue account should be shown separately from other expenditures. So it is shown separately from this one. Revenue account, capital account, interest payments. Look, interest payment and grant in aid for creation of capital assets. So this is still part of revenue expenditure. Remember, and we will show how that impacts the deficit calculation. Okay, revenue deficit. What is a revenue deficit? It says 10 minus 1. See, what is 10? Revenue expenditure is 10 and minus 1 revenue receipt. So revenue expenditure minus revenue receipt. This is revenue expenditure minus revenue receipt. This is your revenue deficit. What are the trends? Supposed to be 2.7, went as high as 7.5. Government says we'll bring it to 5.1. And then we have effective revenue deficit. What is effective revenue deficit? This minus something. What something? Grant in aid for creation of capital assets. The argument is, look, yes, we have made certain expenditure from our revenue account, but that expenditure has been made as a grant to the states that will in turn create capital assets. So we should need another. So grant in aid to states which creates capital assets. This is effective revenue deficit. Rather, you might call it a sleight of hand or something else. Fiscal deficit, the most important. Essentially, it means your debt level. Essentially, it means your debt level. Okay. This as a percentage of GDP. Debt as a percentage of GDP. Look what happened. From 3.5, it rose to 9.5%. And government is saying that even in the budget estimate, it will stay around 6.8. Primary deficit, simple. Fiscal deficit minus interest payment. Say, if you the notional idea is that if you did not have to pay any interest, then this will be your debt as a percentage of GDP, and which is here. Even here, this is. So perhaps in a way, it shows the real borrowing for that year. And look, what is the real borrowing for that year? From 0.4%, that means the real borrowing was very negligible actually projected. But then they had to borrow. This is the real borrowing. How much they had to borrow due to a decline in income. Next, see where rupee comes from. Okay, such infographics are given in budget at a glance. This is we are picking it up from. Which is the biggest head? Borrowing and other liabilities. We saw this is the effectively such high level of borrowing. This year this is the highest. Okay. Then second most, goods and services tax. Indirect tax have come ahead of direct taxes in terms of being the source of revenue. Second. Third, income tax. Fourth, corporation tax. Normally corporation tax used to be much higher than income tax, but due to the contraction in economy, this has come down. And then there are smaller ones. You have union excise duty, you have non-tax revenues, non-debt capital receipts, and customs. Customs is very low, 3%. Now let's see a comparison between the budget of 2021 and this year's budget. Look, this year borrowing is almost 36%. Last year it was only 20. It was still the largest, still the gap between the second largest, which is 18%, and first was very narrow. But look at this year, 36 is the highest and the second highest is income tax. Okay. Another thing, that earlier corporation tax was the second highest. This year income tax is, see the contraction from 18% to 13%. In fact, this is the first time that after a very long time that even agriculture has almost become 20% of India's GDP. For some time it had been in the range of 13, 14, 15%. Why? Because while the every other sector of economy has declined or contracted, agriculture has shown a robust growth. So earlier, though borrowing and other liabilities were still the largest source, the share of the pie was much smaller. Also, corporate tax was the second highest. This year income tax is the second highest. Okay. GST, look, even GST has come down. Earlier it was 18%, this time it is only 15%. So now it is a bit difficult to frame a prelims question from this. Why? Because these figures are projections and projections vary. However, there could be a comparative question on mains, or you could make a comparative argument in mains while saying that suppose there is a question on the economic or fiscal health of the government. You could make an argument that look, corporate tax has come down, GST has come down, borrowing has increased, etc. Then where rupee goes to, which is the highest? Interest payment. So borrowing is the highest source of, or the largest source of income. Interest payment is also the largest source of expenditure. What next? States' share of taxes and duties. Okay. Then you have central sector schemes. What happens here? 100% contribution by government. Then you have almost 10%, there are two, finance commission and other transfers and other expenditures. Okay. Then you have the smaller ones. Defense is what? 8% of the total budget. A comparison. Earlier, see, states' share of taxes and duties were 20, now it is 16. Rest of it is comparatively small here and there changes. I don't see much difference here. Central sector scheme almost same. Interest payment earlier, see, okay, one trend is noticeable. Earlier, states' share of taxes and duties was highest, okay, 20. Now this year interest payment is the highest. That is the one visible trend which you might use as an argument. Sources of financing fiscal deficit. How do you finance fiscal deficit? Grand total, draw down from cash balance. If you had some cash balance, you're using it, and debt receipt. Among the debt receipt, market borrowings, GSEC means government securities and T-bills. What is the difference? T-bills are short term up to 1 year with different maturity dates, 1 week, 3 week, 3 months, etc. up to 1 year, short term borrowing. And government securities, they are also called dated securities, and they are for longer periods, for say 10 year, 5 year. The 10-year security is normally the benchmark for calculating the bond yield in the market. Securities against small savings. Now we know that a lot of people buy these small saving instruments, and since these are income generated, these are assets, so they borrow against them. State Provident Fund, other receipts, and external debt. Look, India's external debt position is very comfortable. Even in the time of crisis, it did not went that much high, and here such small projection, only 1500 crore. Okay, which is the biggest source? Obviously, borrowing from market by issue of government bonds from 5,35,000 crore to 12,73,000 crore, a sudden increase. So whatever increase we saw in fiscal deficit was primarily because of this. Then there is a slight increase here, borrowing against those securities. The external position is very comfortable. Drawdown from cash balance is that they are borrowing a lot of from there, taking, using your own surplus cash, and then you have given the grand total. See the increase in source of financing fiscal debt. How much is increased? Here, sources of deficit financing. Market borrowing has always been highest. Okay. In the blue one, securities against small saving. Okay. Then what we saw in tabular format, in tabular format here, we are seeing in graphical format here. Okay. External debt, see, can't even see here. In fact, even despite of this, when the last time government said that we might increase India's external borrowing, there was a major push from the market, from the intellectual class, from bureaucratic class, etc. So that plan was quietly shelved. Simple, see the trend. What happened here? Between the actuals of 1920 and revised, Corona hit. So then you have deficit trends. Now there have been questions on trends, that India's debt to GDP, tax to GDP ratio has been consistently increasing, India's debt has been consistently decreasing or increasing, etc. So there could be questions of trends, but again, do not try to force yourself to remember this. If you remember, that's fine. Same we saw here, from 4.6% of actuals, it has gone up in the revised estimate to 9.5, and even here they are saying that it is going to stay at a very high level. Ideally we should be here, this thing should be here, and the closest we have come was 3.4% in 2018. But since then the economy started slowing down. So what? Counter-cyclic approach, expansionary monetary policy, fiscal deficit had to go up, there is no way around it. So it went up slightly, not a very slightly uncomfortable situation, not very difficult, but due to Corona, it went sharp, again increased sharply. Now, if this had happened without the background of pandemic, the international institutions, the domestic financial market, the entire system would have punished the government for it. But as we discussed in the chapter of credit rating agencies, that this is the trend right now across the globe. So nobody is particularly bothered about fiscal deficit. Everybody knows that the only concern right now is the quality of spending. You have to spend. There is no other way around it. The only concern is where are you spending? And in this year's budget, government has highlighted that they are going to focus on infrastructure. How? We will see when we see the provisions of budget speech. Every other deficit trend almost always follows the trend of fiscal deficit. So you can understand, you can remember that the most important figure is the fiscal deficit. Every other deficit either derives from it or continuously, you can see continuously follows the same trend. Trends in tax receipts of center. Okay, the catch here is this does not include trends of tax receipts of state governments. For example, going up, currently it is 9.99% as a percentage of GDP. Okay, 9.9% as a percent of GDP. Look, this is only central. If we add states, this percentage will go to 12 to 13%. Okay, this is the overall collection. Now you have direct tax. They are more or less same this year for 5.0%, 4.9%. In fact, it is difficult to tell which is which. Right? They are stopping at exactly the same point. Normally, we see that indirect tax in central kitty is normally lower than direct tax. Okay, but if you think about the overall tax to GDP ratio of the country, then indirect taxes will go up. Why? Because states do not raise direct taxes like income tax or corporation tax. So in India's overall tax to GDP ratio, the share of indirect tax will be higher. But in central, direct is mostly higher, or this year almost same. So this is where there could be a catch in prelims examination. They will say that India's direct tax to GDP ratio is higher than indirect tax, India. But the answer will change if we say center. So in case of center, direct tax is normally genuinely higher than indirect tax. But overall, when we add even states, then indirect taxes will go up. Expenditure of government, center's expenditure, we have seen it here. See, we have seen here that expenditures of each ministry classified first into two heads, center's expenditure and transfers to the state, and then both are categorized again separately. Okay, so that's what we are going to see here. Center's expenditure, establishment expenditure means salaries, etc. Then central sector schemes. What is the trend? See, from 8,31,000 crore to 12,63,000 crore, a sudden increase, expansionary fiscal policy and other central expenditure relatively same. This is relatively same, not much change. Similarly, the establishment expenditure like salaries, etc., not much change here. Transfers to the states and union territories. Centrally sponsored schemes. Nominal scheme from 3,39,000 to 3,87,000. Finance commission grounds. Now, what are these finance commission grounds? If you recall correctly, these grants are separate from that 41%. Okay, we'll come back to this. Finance commission grants. Grants to urban local bodies. This is part of the constitution, that a part of the job of the finance commission is to make recommendations so as to increase the augment the resources of the state so that they can support the local bodies themselves. So, but however, some grants are made directly. Grants are to urban bodies, see, to rural bodies, grant for health sector. These recommendations are made by finance commission. Grant in aid for state disaster response fund, post devolution revenue deficit grants. So these are finance commission grants apart from the devolution of 41% from the divisible pool of resources of. Okay, so we had seen this one. Here, same what we saw in a tabular form is in a graphical form. Okay, see, establishment expenditure more or less same we saw. Central sector scheme, see, this became this. Then other central expenditure increased marginally. Okay, same thing in a graphic. Again, though it will come down slightly, the central sector scheme, but going to certainly stay above this one. Capital expenditure of the government. As we saw that government is saying government has borrowed a lot. Now some of the borrowing has been used as a fiscal stimulus. Some of the borrowing has been used as a direct transfer to the people. Some of the borrowing has been used as subsidy. Subsidies in food, subsidy in fertilizer, subsidy in fuel. However, the government's major push, almost as much as 35% from the previous budget, is in the form of capital expenditure. And it is classified into three categories. Budgetary support directly from government books. Ministry of Railways IEBRs and IBBRs excluding Ministry of Railways. What are IEBRs? We shall see next, but first let's see the classification. Look, the direct support from 4,12,000 to 4,39,000 even between budget and revise was increased, and it has been budgeted at 5,54,000. This is roughly a 35% increase. Okay, that means even from its own pockets it is going to increase expenditure on infrastructure significantly through national infrastructure pipeline and other areas. Then IBR of railway. Now railway, as you can see, it came up with its own master plan for 2030. It has also gone up, and in IEBR excluding railway it has gone up as well. Now let's see what is IEBR actually, then we will come back here. Okay, what is IEBR? Internal and extra budgetary resources. Internal and extra budgetary resources. These are planned, though we don't have now that planned and non-planned classification. These are planned or capital expenditures. Resources raised by PSUs through profits, loans and equity. Say there is a PSU. For example, you have, let's take ONGC. Okay, and it raises loan. Using that loan, it creates an infrastructure project. Okay, now that loan will not be on government books. It will be on the book of ONGC because it is a separate legal entity. The extra budgetary resources in previous budget, center has admitted they are around 0.8% of GDP in addition to the fiscal deficit. However, the difference between a normal loan taken by a public sector enterprise and these are that they are backed by government. They will stay on the book of that particular entity. Therefore, they would not form a part of fiscal deficit. However, they are backed by government bonds. That means, so you do have a sovereign backing behind it. When a loan is raised by that company or PSU, it is through these bonds and they are almost as much as equal to the government bonds in quality. Though they don't form part of, this is the most crucial part, that they are not part of fiscal deficit. They are an extra budgetary resource to raise capital. Now going back here, though they have, what they have done this time is that they have enhanced the budgetary support itself. The IEBR per se has not gone up that much. Okay, from 5,80,000. In fact, it came down, and this year it will even come down further. The biggest component is this. However, this was not the case always. As we saw that in last year's budget, government admitted that it is 0.8% of GDP. So technically, whatever is the fiscal deficit, you add 0.8% to that. That is the real liability of government. Okay, what happens that these liabilities reflect on the book of those corporations or those companies which are separate legal entities rather than government. But say in the case of, and why they have shown the IEBR of railway separately? Because see, Ministry of Railway is a department of Government of India. So what happens that the companies or subsidiaries, you might use the term, raise IEBRs. So they are kind of different from other PSCs. Therefore, IEBRs of Ministry of Railways are shown differently, because therefore they are undertaking the corporatization of Ministry of Railway. So what happens that Ministry of Railway or Railway can raise capital as any other private company or public sector company. When a company raises loans, it raises loans on the basis of its own account book, on the basis of the health of its own business model. Okay, but in the case of railway, since it is legally part of the Government of India, a department of Government of India, therefore its extra budgetary resources are different from other extra budgetary resources, and that is why they are taking corporatization of. See, corporatization, there is a popular myth in the market that the government is undertaking a wholesale privatization of ministry or railways, but corporatization is not privatization. Even ordnance factory boards are being corporatized. What it means is that they will be separated from Government of India in a legal sense. They will be treated as a legal entity, separate legal entity. So when they raise capital via loan, equity, etc., currently it is railway is 100% government owned. But say about it releases equity and it comes up with an IPO and raises 10% of its capital as equity capital. So it will alleviate the financial position of railway a lot. Similarly, if they want to raise debt loan, they can borrow from the market on their own books. And that will not form part of Ministry of Railway, Government of India's budget. So that is why we have shown that the IEBR of Ministry of Railway is slightly different from other IEBRs, because it's a part of the government department. It is a government department, and its subsidiaries, say like IRCTC, they etc. raise this loan. See, as we saw that IEBR is actually came down and it is going to come down even further. Okay, this time biggest source is budgetary support. No sleight of hand, clear cut admission that yes, we are going to raise money directly. Okay, in this period, see, it went up, though the slope is slightly declined, but still higher, slight increase. Okay, but this is almost same. Whatever the rise we see is because of this. In this phase, the going up is here in gross budgetary support rather than here. But in this phase, the IEBR was the dominant component. Okay, same, the graphical representation of a tabular format. We have seen this one. See, on IEBR, there could be a prelims question that it forms part of the governments of India's fiscal deficit, true or not. It is treated, it is backed up by the government bonds, true or not, true, false, etc. So in this manner, there could be a question. Now, major heads of expenditures. Due to shortage of place, let's say this was you have budget estimate of previous year, you have revised estimate of previous year, and budget estimate for this year, and this is the actual. Look, again, there is no need to remember each and every figure. Just remember some of the trends. For example, look at the fertilizer subsidy. From 71,000 crores, it went to 1,33,000 crores. Such sharp jump. And it is going to stay elevated from this level. Why? Because we talked about growth. Okay, the growth in agriculture sector. So therefore, if the acreage has increased, that is more input will be needed, and already farmers are facing hardship due to lockdown, so government enhance the subsidy. Similarly, see, you have other areas like commerce and industry, you have allied and agriculture, almost same. Okay, energy, external affairs, finance, health. In health, there was a jump, and it is going to stay elevated. All right. Here, the one I wanted to highlight, or we talked about recently, in defense expenditure from 3,23,000 crore to 3,43,000 crore, an increase of almost 20,000 crore from budget estimate to revised estimate. Why? Because of the month-long standoff in the eastern Ladakh. So what happens that when government of India decided, or army decided, that we have to stay through the winter in this hostile terrain, so they had to stock up a lot of things, right? Although some are claiming that most of the increase is because of the allotment, the navies and air force made more procurements. One should go into the details of that procurement, but I don't think that would be necessary here. There was an increase, so but from here the increase is only from revised estimate of last year and budget estimate of this year. The increase is merely 4,000 crore. That means not much, despite all the talks of modernization, etc., not much has been actually allocated for capital acquisition in defense sector. And a major portion of this is pensions. A major portion of this is almost 1.3 lakh crore is pensions. Okay, and then apart from pension, if you recall correctly, since the one rank one pension has been established, pension budget has shot up drastically. Apart from pensions, you have salaries and repairs and maintenance cost. So the actual amount for capital acquisition is very small, and defense expenditure as a percentage of GDP has actually come down. See here in rural development, a very sharp increase from 1,44,000 to 2,16,000. Why? Because a lot of direct transfers were undertaken under 𝐃𝐞𝐚𝐫 𝐕𝐢𝐞𝐰𝐞𝐫 Yojana, etc. So see the trends. Do not try to remember. Okay. Look, in GST compensation fund, there was a shortfall, and which created problems. Okay. Composition of transfers to states and UTs. This is devolution. All right, 41%. Though due to the cess and surcharge, the true extent, see legally 41% is supposed to be given from the devolvable pool of taxes. There are certain taxes which have to be shared, taxes like corporation tax, income tax, etc. Earlier there was service tax, etc. So out of that you are supposed to give 41%. But the catch is, if government imposes any cess or surcharge on income tax or corporation tax or custom duty, etc., then that is not shareable. So the critics claim that the actually devolved amount is much less. You can see between budget and revised estimate, this came down because the government's revenue receipts came down, and then it is supposed to go up again. Then you have scheme related, sponsored scheme, sector scheme, sudden jump because of the expansionary fiscal policy, and then though will come down but not as low as this one. And then finance commission grants, we saw what those were: grants to urban local bodies, SDRF, and to the health, etc. Now finance commission grants we had seen this here. Outlay on major schemes. Now there is at the end of budget, at a glance, there is a long list running into 3 to 4 pages of outlay to major schemes. There is no point of cramming each and every one of them. Just I have highlighted that they are classified into 3 categories: core of the core schemes, and major central sector schemes. Now when did this classification came up? When an empowered group of chief ministers decided to reclassify them in the aftermath of creation of Niti Aayog. So they were classified into core of the core schemes, and in core of the core schemes, existing share between center and states was maintained. Okay, there are almost 6 of them. Manrega is part of it, social assistance program, etc. Schemes for minorities, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, etc. form part of it. Apart from Manrega and the schemes I have mentioned, other important ones are in the core. And here You have, here comes that 60-40 and 90-10 formula and other major central sector schemes. This is the broad classification given in that document. It runs into 3 to 4 pages where they have highlighted, they have given every scheme, and there is no need to remember them. At best, you should remember which 6 schemes are part of the core of the core. That's it. Okay, that much you should remember. That's all. I have highlighted here few of the major fluctuations. For example, in Manrega, between budget and revised and budget, from 61,500 crores to 1,11,500 crores. Why sudden jump? Because of the migrant caravans went to home, they needed labor, so Manrega was the last refuge in their case, and therefore such sudden jump. I mean, the allotted amount was spent in first few months only. This is almost double of that, and though it is not come back to this level, it is going to remain inflated at the 73,000 crore, meaning, and I would not be surprised if the budget estimate again goes up to 80 or 90,000 crore, because still there is lot of rural unemployment, so that demand will go up again. Similarly, National Social Assistance Program from 9,000 crore to 42,000 crore. What happened? Government made some direct benefit transfers to women and etc. So there you saw, in to women they were made, to older people those transfers were made. So we see this bump because of that only. And again, see, now this one is coming down exactly at this level, meaning government plans to make no more direct transfers. Jal Jeevan Mission, a sharp jump from 11,000 crore to 50,000 crore, and the scheme is now coming of age. It seems to me that in the next few years that this Jal Jeevan Mission will be the flagship scheme of Government of India, while the Swachh Bharat Mission will consolidate on the gains made previously. So there is a sudden increase, though base their level is very low, from 11,000 crore to 50,000 crore. Urea subsidy from 47, we had seen here. In fertilizer subsidy, there was a jump from 71,000 crore to 1,33,000 crore. And as you can see here, that is primarily because of urea subsidy. Why? Because there was rural distress because of lockdown. Also, agriculture sector was expanding, so there was more acreage under cultivation. Therefore, more input was needed. So government gave more subsidy, and you can see a jump in urea subsidy from 47,000 crore to 94,000 crore. And in budget, it is about to come down, but not as much as this level. Now, food subsidy to FCI under NFSA. For some reason, look at this jump from budget estimate to revised and budget again. 77,000 crore to 3,44,000 crore, and budget is 2 lakh crore. What has happened here? Actually, a lot of FCI's borrowings have been brought on the books of Government of India. Earlier, the market borrowing of FCI was on the books of FCI. FCI was running a huge amount of debt, much larger than its actual value as a corporation. That has been transferred to the books of Government of India. Okay, so whatever loan they had, that loan has been taken by Government of India. This is that subsidy. This was one of the reasons why FCI was not able to function effectively, because what happens that they had to pay a huge amount of interest. So whatever government was giving you, you end up paying interest rather than being able to invest on your own infrastructure development of procurement, etc., procurement, marketing, etc. So what they have done, they have taken that liability from FCI's books to government's books. The food subsidy under FCA is actually this second one, from 37,000 crore to 78,000 crore. We remember that for the extent of NFSA was expanded. The period for which it was the free ration was given was increased. So actual food subsidy is the second one. This one is only a transfer of debt from the books of FCI to the books of Government of India. Now the budget speech. See, this is the most highlighted and perhaps most controversial part of the budget. What happens that the next morning when we read newspapers pick up separate news items depending upon the inclinations and biases of their own readers. A centrist newspaper will highlight certain parts of the budget, a leftist newspaper or media will highlight certain parts, and a right-wing newspaper will highlight certain parts. So, if a right-wing newspaper says that congratulations, there have been no wealth tax, a left-wing media will highlight that they could not dare tax the rich. They are not doing anything about inequality. Okay. If a right-wing media talks about that the defense expenditure is very low, then left-wing media will talk about again they have disappointed in education. So what happens that a lot of things are picked from budget speech. Sometimes even a very minor inconsequential statement is picked out. Okay. For example, there was a statement that in ancient India was Atmanirbhar Bharat, and see, rather than going into the essence of what the argument is, what argument is being constructed, what happens that media or people take one or two bit out of it and run with it. So, but being a student, you should look into the nuances, understand the implications, etc., rather than going for the highlights. Don't don't fall for those YouTube videos where they pick up one or two areas and they say, see this. There is no such thing as good or bad budget. The budget represents the circumstances of government. No government could have given a better fiscal deficit situation here. So budget represents circumstances. It's not about the government per se. Now budget speech. These were some of the highlights in newspapers. That big spending push blended with reforms, a bad bank and a DFI. FDI hike to 75% insurance, import duty on gold reduced. Now, this is rather inconsequential in larger scheme of things, but still has consequences. Why? Because there is a body of argument that says that due to very low import duties on gold, the smuggling had come down. The smuggling of gold, the smuggling in which the famed dons of 90s had made their fortune. They said that due to a low import duty, the smuggling had come down. But again, the duties was raised and within a very few years, it went as high as 12%. So government, by reducing that import duty on gold, is again reducing the arbitrage on gold smuggling. So in larger scheme of things, it might appear inconsequential, but it still has some consequence. And health gets a vaccine shot. These were the highlights in the newspapers. Now also, a budget speech contains many ideas. Some of them are routine. For example, a certain fund already exists and government is making more contribution to it. Something like agriculture e-NAM, okay? National Agricultural Marketplace, Electronic National Agricultural Marketplace. It has been around for a while and it is expanding, improving, learning from experience. So government has shown its faith again and made more contributions to expand its coverage. Something like agricultural subsidy or agricultural credit. Government has set almost a 16 lakh crore target of agricultural credit, mostly short term in nature, for this year. Each year this target is raised slightly and they are mostly met. But what is curious is that the actual investment in agricultural sector, both input in the form of input, investment, short term, long term, is lower than this figure. So, and since these agricultural credits are mostly in the nature of short term credit like subsidy credit like buying seed, credit for improving the quality of land, etc. So most of these are actually for through Kisan credit cards. They are short term credits, but the actual investment in agriculture, both short term and long term, is much lower than this. So what it shows that there is a large diversion of funds, because what happens that the borrower can get is charged around 1 or 2%. There is interest subvention scheme of Government of India that so there will be some reduction in interest, and then if you pay on time, some more reduction will be given, and then some state governments add their own share. So effectively 1 or 2% interest is paid. Now even on a fixed deposit, the interest rate currently is 4.5. Last year it was 6.5. If you invest, if you take loan and give other people on loan, you can charge in informal economy, you can charge much higher rates. So a lot of diversion also takes place of agricultural credits. Point is, you should read budget speech. It's not very large and it has many small nuggets. In this lecture, we have only highlighted the ones which have relevance to the larger preparation, which is new, or which could be used to frame a question in prelims or mains. Okay, though I will strongly advise that you should go ahead and read the rest of the budget as well, because it has many detailed regulation kind of things. Also, there is a saying that says there is a many slip between the cup and the lip, and there have been some slips. For example, as we discussed in last year's budget, there were talks of borrowing in foreign denominated bonds, borrowing from external market. But the memories of global financial crisis, Eurozone crisis, India's 1991 default, though India did not default in 1991 and it was not because of India's foreign borrowing, the I would say the muscle memory of Indian economy kicked back and that plan was gently shelved. Similarly, the idea of bad bank. This year again, due to COVID pandemic, there has been a lot of restructuring and there is a good amount of thinking going on that maybe in near future we will need an institution that will take those NPAs or restructured loan assets from the books of the bank, manage them, make them lucrative, and then sell it to other investment agencies. So, but however, the idea of bad bank has been mooted previously as well in the context of previous NPA events. Similarly, electoral bonds were announced in budget speech and many other acts were amended to implement them. Aadhaar Act passed as a money bill. The idea here is there is a lot in the budget which is not entirely about finances of the government. Some of them get dropped, like foreign banks, foreign borrowing. Some of them are not new. Some of them are more political than economic. And then there is lot of detailed, regular, rather boring stuff, but that should be read as well. So you should read budget speech. Okay, sui generis black swan COVID-19. The budget speech says that COVID-19 was a sui generis event. That means of its own kind. Black swan means the same thing. We had used the word black swan in the case of survey, so we are using it again here. A speech says that within a few days of the announcement of nationwide lockdown, Government of India announced the 𝐃𝐞𝐚𝐫 𝐕𝐢𝐞𝐰𝐞𝐫 Yojana, and through which food subsidy was given, LPG subsidy was given, direct benefit transfers were announced. Then we had Atmanirbhar Bharat announcements. There were 3 volumes of that. Different monetary and fiscal policy stimuluses were announced. Different policy liberalization measures were announced. And it says that adding the RBI's monetary policy measures, they constitute almost 13% of GDP. And here there was a lot of criticism of government. It says that government should not rely on monetary policy instruments. Rather, it should go for expansionary fiscal policy, specifically in the nature of giving cash to the people. Okay, so that they can meet their basic needs. Some of the economists like Nobel laureate Abhijit Banerjee and many other people talked about that. Look, right now the demand is so low that whatever you spend will not generate, will not have a cascading effect. The most effective way would be to give direct benefit transfer, and the government's cautious approach of keeping the powder dry for unforeseen circumstances were widely criticized. Government says that through our 3 Atmanirbhar Bharat packages and RBI's monetary policy measures, we have given as much as 13% of GDP in stimulus. Now, what did RBI do? If you remember, apart from a very liberal monetary policy, it came up with a refinancing scheme for NBFCs and HFCs that were suffering from cash flow problem. Why? Because see, the loan they gave, they would not get much return immediately because of the economic decline. So what happens? Then you have asset liability mismatch. So to help you in that circumstances, especially helping NBFCs and HFCs, non-banking financing corporations and housing financing corporations, a credit guarantee was announced. A credit guarantee corpus was announced. Similarly, a scheme for SMEs was announced that their loans will be restructured, etc. For corporate sector, we talked about during survey that the committee has identified around more 30 sectors where restructuring can be undertaken. There were 2 loan moratoriums and then one-time restructuring has been announced. So these are some of the measures of RBI. The survey says that, budget says 2 vaccines developed and a total of 35,000 crore budgetary allocation has been made for vaccination in this year's budget. Okay, this is not the only amount. The amount will most certainly increase and more provisions will be made in next year's budget or in the revised estimates. Atmanirbhar Bharat accelerated structural reforms. Look, the word here is accelerated, meaning they were already being undertaken. None of the ideas are new. Make in India could easily be called Atmanirbhar Bharat, right? Startup India could easily be called Atmanirbhar Bharat. So the packaging has changed, acceleration has happened, but structural reforms were already proposed. They are already in pipeline. Redefinition of an MSME from turnover to investment, right? Opening the mineral sector, coal mining has been opened up. Agri and labor laws, this one is generating lot of heat, and this one we are yet to see its impact, although it is very unlikely that it will address some of the root causes or root problems of labor sector, for example informalization, etc. Recently there was violence in near Bangalore, in one of the suppliers of iPhone. I'm forgetting its exact name. In the manufacturing facility of that supplier, there was a lot of violence. Why? Because they had failed to pay as their salaries, failed to pay the salaries of their employees, and as much as 70 to 80% of their employees were contractual labor. Though contractual labor act has not been amended in these labor laws, they have come up with the idea of fixed term employment, meaning you have to pay same amount for same work and give other social security and health benefits. However, you can hire someone for a fixed period and without giving a severance package, without giving notice, you can dismiss them after that period. The argument is that they should be able to address the problem of informalization or rather hiring of contractual laborers. But the truth is contractual labor are hired because of the wage differential. You can pay them less, therefore you hire them. There is no other reason. I mean, a formal sector company, the company where violence happened, they had as much as 70 to 80% of their employees in the contractual employees, and even the ones they are paying lower than their regular employees, they were not being paid for 3 to 4 months. So we have to wait and watch for the impact of labor laws. Then you have privatization of PSUs. Government is making a big push in that direction, as we shall see in the later slides. ONOR, One Nation, One Ration Card, it has been accelerated. Earlier, only few pilot projects were being run between in Maharashtra. One was being run in Maharashtra and one was being run in Tamil Nadu, in between Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Tamil Nadu, etc. But now it has been accelerated. Then we have production linked incentive scheme, which has identified a few areas where certain deductions will be given on the basis of the quota of production. Are some of the notable reforms. Look, you could have easily announced it under Make in India, because this is about manufacturing. But given the circumstances, a new scheme came and PLIS was announced under Atmanirbhar Bharat. So the ideas are not new. Each and every country wants to be independent. Each and every country wants to be self-secure. Faceless IT assessment. What happens that if you file a return, there is some discrepancy, your assessment takes place. Often the assessing officer, due to his own discretion and due to the collision between the assessee and assessor, a lot of corruption happens. So what have they done? They have made assessment faceless. I mean, the person who is given your case for assessment does not know you, you don't know him, he could be from another circle. There will be no direct communication. It will be prohibited between the assessee and assessor. Everything will will happen electronically and identities will be kept secret. The idea is to reduce discretion. If you do not know who you are dealing with, how will you collude to do corruption? This is the idea behind it, and this is being assessed. The faceless assessment is being extended to the even judicial process. Then you have DBT, direct benefit transfer, and financial inclusions are the other structural reforms, but as you can see, none of them are new. Redefinition of MSME was announced or planned for a few years, okay, and almost everything else was already going on in the process. So the idea is acceleration. Atmanirbhar Bharat is not new, perhaps only the slogan is new. So whenever you see a very strong unnecessary criticism of ANB, think it's a slightly over the board. Now part A of the budget talks about a vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat. My suggestion will be skip the political commentary. Understand the nuances. As we discussed in previous slide, that most of the ideas were already there. Okay, they have only accelerated them. So don't go into that why this is reactionary, etc. Don't go into that. Essentially same ideas as before, and it rests on 6 pillars. And see the 6 pillars: health and well-being, physical and financial infrastructure, inclusive development, reinvigorating human capital, innovation and R&D, minimum government and maximum governance. Now, is any of this new? The slogan of minimum government, maximum governance was given as far back as 2014, right? Reinvigorating human capital, inclusive development, as old as 11th. This slogan is as old as 11th plan. Infrastructure, health and well-being, everything was already there. A new scheme has been announced, Prime Minister Atmanirbhar Swasth Bharat Yojana, because in the beginning of the pandemic, there was a sudden realization that we do not have infrastructure to test or ramp up our testing that quickly. We do not have infrastructure to isolate positive patients. We do not have infrastructure for proper disease surveillance. Some of the countries like South Korea, which had been hit severely during the time of SARS virus, they had a proper surveillance systems. We do have integrated disease surveillance system, but they were not up to the mark, because once the pandemic took hold of the country, the things like contact tracing were given up. And okay, now there is no point in contact tracing. However, so the realizations that dawned in the era of COVID-19, that is the inspiration behind this scheme. What they say: preventive, curative and well-being across primary, secondary and tertiary care system, and health and wellness centers. Now health and wellness centers were already announced in Ayushman Bharat scheme. There were 2 components. One was PMJ, Jan Arogya Yojana. Second one this. What was this? They were supposed to convert sub-centers and primary health centers into health and wellness centers, meaning that their infrastructure, the training or the competency of the manpower will be enhanced, etc. So they are saying that we will focus on preventive healthcare. Curative means treatment, medicine, etc. Preventive means preventing a disease, preventing disease like malaria, TB, etc. through improved hygiene, improved nutritional standards, improved clean environment, etc. This is preventive. Vaccination is preventive healthcare. Curative, treating once a disease happen, and well-being, overall well-being, reduction in pollution, etc. Overall well-being. Exercising, awareness, getting checked up regularly. These are 3 pillars across primary, secondary and tertiary healthcare system. So investments will be made in these areas. This is the allocated money which will be in addition to the existing NHM, ICDS, Poshan Abhiyan, etc. Integrated public health labs in all districts. See, labs. Testing infrastructure proved inadequate, so need labs. Others: strengthening of National Center for Disease Control and its 5 regional branches and 20 metropolitan health surveillance units. Why? Because health surveillance is as much a concern as internal security. Okay, someone came from somewhere with COVID positive case could not be detected. Realize ki okay, someone has skipped quarantine, jumped quarantine, went home, cannot be detected. Contact tracing, cannot find how many people they came into contact with. This pandemic has made the world realize that apart from security and internal security and economic growth, health security is as much important and perhaps more important. Therefore, more emphasis is being made on surveillance. The countries like South Korea responded much better from the beginning because they had a very good surveillance system. The idea of contact tracing immediately ran into privacy concerns in India because we had not thought these things through. So surveillance is important and they are investing in surveillance infrastructure. Now, expansion of integrated health information portal to all states and UTs to connect all public health lab. More about convergence between different stakeholders. Operationalization of 17 new public health units and strengthening of 1733 existing public health units at points of entry. That is at 32 airports, 11 seaports and 7 land crossing. Same thing. You have to catch someone who might potentially carry the virus in their body. Okay, they should be separated, they should be quarantined. Things like sanitary and phytosanitary standards. I mean, countries like Australia, which have a unique ecological system, have very robust quarantine measures, not only for human beings, even for animals and fruits, because their ecology is vulnerable to the invasive species. This is for ecological balance, but we need for people as well because of the learnings of COVID-19. So they are strengthening public health units at points of entry so that people can be tested, people can be checked, people can be quarantined, people can be treated, etc. Setting up 15 public health emergency operation centers and 2 mobile hospitals, and this, a National Institute for One Health, a kind of policy making body, a regional platform for WHO Southeast Asia region. Realization that WHO has been playing into the hands of vested interests, so democratic countries have to make contribution. 9 biosafety level 3 laboratories. Currently what happened that we had very few level 3 laboratories where tests, sensitive tests like RT-PCR could be carried out. So we need more of them. Currently many of the public health medical colleges perform that role. So that will be upgraded as well. Then Mission Poshan 2. This is from the Poshan Abhiyan 1. What it does, it is not a new scheme. Rather, it is about bringing convergence between different existing schemes like ICDS, etc. And convergence through active surveillance and feedback of data. See, for these things depend more on newspaper articles that take a critical assessment of things. Okay, because what budget document does, it will say, okay, previous one was good, it achieved these many things, we are making more allocations, we are launching a new scheme. So this is not a critical understanding, but the questions in paper 2 and 3 and such, that they require you some critical understanding. This is new, Jal Jeevan Mission. Universal water supply to all urban local bodies with 2.86 crore households, tap connection, and a liquid waste management in 500 Amrut cities. Now what are Amrut cities? After Smart City Mission, for the next tier of cities there was Amrut Mission. Liquid waste management and tap water connection. These are the 2 pillars for all urban local bodies. We saw that the allocation to Jal Jeevan Mission was increased from 11,000 crore to 50,000 crore. So this is the reason for that quantum jump. Over the next 5 years, they will give 2,87,000 crores, and this year itself they have made almost a 50,000 crore contribution. Okay. Then you have Swachh Bharat, Swasth Bharat for further Swachhata, meanings as you know, the government has, or most of the gram panchayats, cities and states have claimed open defecation free status, though the newspapers and media disagrees and points out several loopholes in the legal definition and in the manner in which the status was claimed. But what is certainly true, that a very large number of toilets have been constructed. There is a significant drop in open defecation, though the battle is not won yet, especially on the frontier of behavioral change and sustainability. Sustainability means how you treat that waste matter. What is the quality and design of the toilets? Single pit, dual pit, septic tank. Septic tanks are not recommended. Mostly a dual pit is recommended. Behavioral change is still an issue. Waste management is an issue. For example, if you want to provide tap water to all rural areas, urban areas, then certainly you have to treat that water. You have to treat the water, you have to treat solid waste. You have to ensure that these things do not come in contact with each other. So it doesn't mean we cannot lower the guard on the issue of Swachhata. We have to focus on further Swachhata. And we intend to focus on complete fecal sludge management. That means the design of toilets. Ideally, you should have a dual pit toilet, but it is very costly to construct. So often people use septic tanks, single pit toilets, and which are not recommended. Wastewater treatment. Now see, this comes in certain areas, it comes close to Jal Jeevan Mission, right? Because if you do not treat wastewater, how will you provide quality water? Source segregation of garbage. Reduction in single-use plastic. Many states are dithering on it. Sometimes a ban is imposed, then it is extended. Reduction in air pollution. Regulation of construction and demolition activities. And bioremediation of all legacy dump sites. We have a dump site, 3-4 dump sites in Delhi also. The Urban Swachh Bharat Mission 2.0 will be implemented with a total financial allocation of 1,11,000 crores over a period of 5 years from this. Now see, the focus is no longer on building toilets. They know that the number of toilets that we could build have been built, but the focus is now on larger things that will make situation more sustainable. Things like waste management, fecal sludge management, solid waste management, liquid waste management, the segregation of garbage, because without segregation of garbage at source you cannot do solid waste management properly. Okay, you have to first segregate it into dry waste, solid waste, organic, non-organic, medical, radioactive, etc. And then even the existing dump sites have to be looked after. So bioremediation for that. So Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is adopting the next set of challenges. Then you have some announcements like pneumococcal vaccine across the country. I picked up because I thought there could be a general science question in prelims of it. 35,000 crore for vaccination. This is only for this year, and even this year it might be increased. For next year there will be further allocation. Allocation for health and well-being is 2,23,000 crore, which is 137% more. Why? Because obviously because of COVID, a new realized focus has been on education, on health. Infrastructure. Production linked incentive for 13 sectors over 5 years. Already because of this we have seen an increase in mobile manufacturing, and there will be a certain, for these 13 sectors, for each unit there will be a certain production quota. If you produce more than that, okay, or if you reach that much level, you will be given a certain benefit in the form of deductions in subsidies, etc. Mega investment textile parks, 7 parks with plug and play facilities. Now 2 things you should understand. Why textile sector is important? Because it has export potential and it has employment generation potential. The areas like textile, leather, footwear have employment potential as well as export potential. So you can have growth and you can have inclusive growth. That is why these are important. And what is plug and play facilities? Plug and play infrastructure facilities are like where the basic infrastructure like construction of building, electricity, water supply, sewage treatment facilities, these are provided, these are set up by the promoter. You have to buy a particular shed in that developed area and you set up your machines and you start productions. So you have to do bare minimum, rest of it is already arranged. Now it talks about national infrastructure pipeline, and it says, see, there was a committee that finalized the report that which sector will be given how much allocation, what should be the funding, what should be the state, center and private contribution. All those were finalized by a committee. But the budget says that we have taken, or we are proposing in the budget speech, 3 steps to further bolster our commitment on the issue. First, institutional structure. Second, asset monetization, and then enhanced capital expenditure. We already saw that in the budget, the capital expenditure has been enhanced significantly, almost as 35%. Then, but first see a bit about infrastructure pipeline, national infrastructure pipeline. It's a total 102 lakh crore boost, not in 1 year but spread up to from financial year 20 to financial year 25, over this long period. 102 lakh crore. Who will be implementing agency? Center will contribute 39%, state will contribute equally, and private sector will contribute 22%, meaning there will be a lot of PPP projects. Okay. Annual investment phasing. Now see, they have divided these 102 lakh crore over this period. Status of projects. Now, under implementation means not all the projects are greenfield. Some of them are brownfield. Some of them are under construction. Under implementation, under development, conceptual, this is the new part. They are conceptualized right now, and unclassified. So they will be classified into either of these. Sector wise, roads 25%, urban development 21%. This is urban development. As you can see, highest is to roads, conventional power, renewable, irrigation and railways. So this is the broad classification. Highest goes to goes to roads. 25% of 102 lakh crore will go to the roads. Okay. Now, as we saw there, it first talked about institutional structure. So we will see what institutional structure it is talking about. Development financial institution. See, one problem for the NPA crisis in India's banking sector was that banking sector in India finances infrastructure project as well. Infrastructure projects like roads, thermal power plant, etc. Now the nature of these projects is that the cash flow starts much later, and it has a very long gestation period. So if there is any delay, and even without delay, often banks face an asset liability mismatch. Means your asset will start generating income much later, but your liability, you have to pay for your liabilities immediately. So there is always this tension. And if there is any disruption or any shock to the system, like ILFS problem, DHFL problem, so that mismatch gets exacerbated because the cash flow is impacted. Now the deposits will reduce or will walk away from the system. So banking sector should not be ideally financing infrastructure projects. Ideally, pension funds, mutual funds, pension funds, these should be financing the infrastructure sector. Why? Because they have long-term capital. They would not per se face asset liability mismatch. Earlier we all know about the ICICI Bank. Earlier it was a proper infrastructure financing institution. It had expertise, it had manpower which was trained to evaluate the viability of projects, and accordingly they will decide what will be the cost of loan, what will be the interest. Currently there is this one major problem in banking sector, that the people in charge of making these loans do not fully understand that how these projects should be evaluated. So even unviable ones are get loan. So to that end, it talks about development finance institutions. Okay, it will start with a 20,000 crore seed capital, and eventually it will generate a lending portfolio of at least 5 lakh crore. What it means is that this much government will give, that listen, you are a company set up under a law, we are giving you this much to start a business. Now using this seed capital, raise this much money from market, borrow this much money from the market, and invest this money, long term capital. Okay, don't borrow from short term sources. I mean, no, NBFCs often do this. They borrow on the basis of commercial paper which have 1 year maturity, and then they give loans which will certainly many cases will have longer maturity period. So whenever there is a cash flow problem, they have this asset liability mismatch. So they say, look, raise money from relaxed capital, pension funds, insurance funds, mutual funds to the extent of 5 lakhs crores, and in 3 years time, and invest in infrastructure projects. Encouraging, also the second step is encouraging debt financing of infrastructure investment trust and real estate investment trust via foreign portfolio capital. They have significantly relaxed the regulations to that end. Now these have to be studied slightly, that what are these two. Okay, these work like mutual funds. What do mutual funds do? Small investors aggregate their money, and the mutual fund manager invests that money in different kind of portfolios. There could be equity mutual fund, there could be debt mutual fund, there could be hybrid mutual fund, and they give units to the retail investors. Those units are tradable on the market. So they work like mutual funds regulated by SEBI. Both equity and debt instruments or even hybrid ones are created under them. They pool money from investors to invest in income generating assets. Say, and they are similar to real estate investment trust. Say there is a road, for example, or a large commercial building, okay, or a thermal power plant, any infrastructure project. Now you and me cannot buy that entirely, but in fact even small investors cannot buy that. The medium-sized investors, these investment trusts aggregate pool money from these investors. They invest in specially income generating assets. That means those assets should give you certain incomes. For example, highways give you toll tax. So what they will do, they will pool money from investors, buy that asset, okay, and on the basis of income generated by that asset, they will give returns to their investors. And similarly, real estate investment trust also invest in income generating real estate assets like malls, buildings, planned cities, etc. So the first idea was this debt development financial institution that will be focused and more importantly trained to finance infrastructure projects, because financing infrastructure projects is different from giving car loan, education loan, etc. Often people who are especially in banking sector, there is not enough training given to actually evaluate an infrastructure project, understand its viability, therefore understand the risk, and therefore charge appropriate interest rates. Then encouraging debt financing of infrastructure investment trusts and REITs via FPI, basically pooling investment from foreign investors to invest in infrastructure projects. This is what it says. Then asset monetization. National Highways Authority of India and Power Grid, this is Power Grid Corporation of India Limited, each have sponsored one IVIT that will attract international and domestic institutional investor. Look, this is not like that they have sold their asset. What has happened, say there is a highway owned by NHAI which gives you a regular income, but since there is so much hunger for infrastructure investment in India, especially in road sector, as we saw that in NIP the largest share is given to roads, that NHAI loads needs a lot of money and needs it upfront. Okay, say suppose from your existing highway assets you are earning 10,000 crore per year, for example, but you need an upfront money of 1 lakh crore. What you do? You monetize that asset, meaning you transfer that asset to an investment trust, a highway or something like that, and ask that trust, look, this is an asset, it generates an income. Now you pool money from investors and in a way you are giving that money. So whatever income there is from that highway asset, then you can use the income from that to give returns to your investor. Okay, so this is the idea. 5 operational roads with an estimated enterprise value of 5,000 crores are being transferred to the NHAI's infrastructure trust. Meaning, look, this is the value, you give me the value upfront and from the regular income from that asset, give returns to your investors. Similarly, transmission asset worth 7,000 crore of Power Grid Corporation of India Limited, a majority, I mean more than 50% of India's transmission infrastructure is owned by Power Grid Corporation. It is one of the Maharatnas. Okay. Transmission assets of a value of 7,000 crore will be transferred to the PGCIL Investment Infrastructure Trust. The logic is same, that there is an income generating asset with a public sector entity, but they need money, so they transfer it to a trust. What trust does? It gives it the value of that asset so that you can use that money. Railways will monetize dedicated freight corridor assets for operations and maintenance after commissioning. These DFCs are proposed to be completed by June 2020. And next lot of airports will be monetized for operations and management concessions. Look, the difference between an outright sale of asset and this way is that here the trust owns that asset rather than individual investors. Okay, and when after a point when they have paid back from the income to their investors, that asset would not belong to the particular investors. We have seen this one. Okay, asset monetization we have saw previously. There will be an asset monetization pipeline and a dashboard, meaning they will identify brownfield projects that can be monetized in this manner. Okay, similar, you transfer to an investment trust and that investment trust pools resources from retail investors, buys that asset, you get the money, and using the regular income from that asset, the investors are paid their dividend. And since that trust is promoted by that PSU, NHAI, Power Grid Corporation, etc., so you cannot say that the asset has been sold to retail investors. Similarly, Gas Authority of India Limited, Indian Oil Corporation, HPCL are also identifying their assets which can be monetized in the manner to generate upfront cash. Warehousing assets of CPSEs like Container Corporation of India, etc., they are being monetized. Even sports stadiums, they will be monetized. Then you have capital expenditure, as we discussed previously, from 4,12,000 crore to it went up and it is going to even increase. It is almost entirely budgetary allocation rather than IEBR. and therefore this is the reason why fiscal deficit has shot up and going to remain consistently above 2 lakh crore to states and autonomous bodies. They even this will be invested in capital creation by states and autonomous bodies. A major push in road sector. Now here a lot of specific road projects are mentioned in the budget speech. If you read the budget speech, and which you should, you will come across those names. A national railway plan 2030. Look, railway needs a lot of investment. You saw that there was a significant portion of railway also in NIP. Okay, therefore railway is undergoing for corporatization. What we talked about the IEBRs, that if they undergo corporatization, they will be able to raise, they will be able to sell their equity to raise capital. They will be able to raise capital by issuing debt instruments, etc. Recently, you must have heard word like operating ratio, means how much money railway has to spend to earn 100 rupee. Recently, it went as high as 98 rupee. That means to earn 100 rupee, it had to in some years had to spend as much as 98 rupees. Why? Because of deteriorating infrastructure. So they have come up with the plan. When that detailed plan is unveiled, we will see that. Also they have announced that Western Dedicated Freight Corridor and Eastern Dedicated Freight Corridor will be commissioned by June 2022. A section of this corridor underwent trials recently. They have said here that railways will monetize dedicated freight corridor assets for operations and maintenance after commissioning. Means once they are commissioned, they will be monetized as well, transferred to an investment trust that will use the income from the asset to pay back its investor. These two are very important for reducing the logistics cost in the country. We had talked about previously how World Bank reports have highlighted that India's logistics cost is way high for a sustainable economic growth. Now, I have picked this that railway has recently introduced Vista Dome coaches on tourist routes. Per se, this information is not that much important, but this word, there could be a question in prelims. That link Hoffman Bush, as you can say, this is a German word because the technology is German. Okay? It's a German word, Linke Hoffman Bush. This word is related to what? Car wagons, you can talk about then road sector, something, etc. In last year's prelims, there was a question about West Texas Intermediate. This term is linked to which sector? So they could easily frame a question that since the reason I picked it up because it was in newspaper too much. So there could be a question in prelims. Otherwise, not very important from civil services perspective. Linke Hoffman Bush, what it is related to? Railway coaches. Okay. Another thing, it says that a framework will be devised to give consumers choices among discoms. Currently what happens that wherever you live, you have only one distribution company that provides electricity in that area. Now, often distribution companies have many problems like aggregate transmission and commercial losses, right? Cross subsidization, that means they will charge more per unit of electricity from commercial customers to subsidize the domestic consumers. They have high level of debt, etc. So for variety of reasons, the quality of service given by discoms is, there is scope for improvement. And then there is a service provider kind of argument that look, if you have more than one service provider in D2H, if you have more than one service provider in mobile telecommunication, why you should not have more than service provider in giving you electricity? So they are saying a framework will be devised to give consumers choices among discoms. So we will see when the framework is unveiled. Reforms based result linked power distribution sector scheme will be launched with an outlay of 3,05,000 crores over 5 years. A reform based and result linked. What sort of reforms are needed? If you remember, some time back, a Uday scheme was launched to reduce the debt level of discoms, because a very high debt level means you are spending all your money on interest payment, you cannot invest on infrastructure improvement, therefore your productivity would not increase, revenue would not increase, then you have to borrow more. So a vicious circle. So the debt level of discoms was very high, and that was partly because of AT and aggregate technical and commercial losses, their inability to recover the cost, etc. So Uday scheme was launched, under which state governments took up the loans of discoms on their books and they were incentivized to that end. However, up to now, after 4-5 years of Uday scheme, the debt level of discoms has risen back to the pre-Uday level, meaning that they did not undertake the structural reforms that were needed to improve their performance. So now they are saying a reform based result linked power distribution sector scheme, again distribution about discoms, will be launched with an outlay of 3,05,000 crore over 5 years. When the scheme will be announced, we shall look at its provisions and what it tries to achieve. The recent farmer protest has one angle about the electricity subsidy. Government had proposed that farmers should pay upfront, they should install more electricity meters on their pumps, and whatever expenditure they incur, they will be paid back. So this was an idea under a proposed law, but this was strongly criticized by the farmers. They feared that, look, government will make us bear the cost of installation of meters, they will not pay us subsidy on time, etc. So it will be very interesting to look at the features of this scheme and how they actually want to implement it, because this is not only about discoms, this is also about the cheap subsidy given to various sectors, cheap electricity given to various sectors. A hydrogen energy mission in 22. Now hydrogen energy to do what? Fuel cells, sorry, not fuel cells, hydrogen cells for hydrogen powered cars. See, Japan is betting big on hydrogen fuel, and possibly this will be something like FAME. We will see when it is announced. FDI in insurance sector. Permissible FDI limit has been increased from 49% to 74% in insurance companies. That means effective control will be in the hand of foreign countries. This increase in limit means that, however, since insurance is very sensitive area, people can be easily defrauded, exploited, so you want some safeguards. And what safeguards are being introduced? That under the new structure, majority of directors on the board and key management persons would be resident Indians. That means foreign residents would not be allowed to hold position of, say, a president of the board or chairperson or CEO, even though a foreign entity can own majority of stakes. So why these safeguards? Because insurance is a sensitive sector, not a complete management control cannot be given. With at least 50% of directors being independent directors. Now, what are independent directors? Independent directors are those that are not involved in the management of company. They do not have a significant exposure to the equity and debt capital of the company, etc. And they are remunerated for their directorship only. Okay. Specific percentage of profits being retained as general reserve. That means you cannot, repatriate all the profit. You have to keep some amount here, reinvest. So I picked up this example because wanted to show that even when you liberalize more than 50%, there are safeguards that you can put in place to protect companies in sensitive sectors. Okay, banking sector issue, a bad bank. In the context of previous NPA crisis, which has not completely become a previous issue, it is persisting. the idea of bad bank was proposed even then. However, what is a bad bank? An asset reconstruction company or asset management company. What it does, it buys restructured or stressed assets from banks. It restructures them, revives them, reinvigorates them, makes them profitable again, and then it sells to alternative investment funds. As I have said, this idea was proposed previously as well. However, the problem that always comes up is how the bank values that asset. Bank says, look, it is indeed an NPA, it is indeed stressed, but the price you are paying, that is too low. Okay, an asset management company or reconstruction company says that, look, if you keep it on your book, you would not be able to revive it. Its profitability, its business will keep going down and down. So take a haircut and give it us at whatever price we are giving. So the problem always has been, I mean, there are asset reconstruction companies right now also, but the problem is how banks and these ARCs look at the those stress assets. It's very difficult to agree at the price. So let's see how they address that challenge. And 20,000 crore for recapitalization of banks. We had seen in previous lectures on survey which said that though asset quality review exposed the extent of problem, it wasn't enough, and even after that the level of NPA kept going up because AQR could not identify problems like evergreening, etc. Examples of Yes Bank, Lakshmi Vilas Bank were given. So what the survey said, that since the true nature and extent of problem was unknown, the things like recapitalization bonds or Mission Indradhanush proved inadequate. Still, and ergo, even in this year, they have allotted sums for recapitalization so that banks can make adequate provisioning for NPA. And since they have announced restructuring this year also, so they are expecting the NPA to rise. 1.75 lakh crore target of disinvestment. As we said previously, government needs money. Okay, and one of the ways of raising money without incurring further debt is disinvestment. Now, disinvestment is a very politically charged area. Okay, they always, I mean, there are very strong opinions on it. Some people say, some time back, Honorable Minister Nitin Gadkari had said कि this देश का राजा व्यापारी, उस देश की प्रजा भिखारी. So there is one sort of argument that government has no business in being the business. But on the other hand, people look at it and they think, oh, they are selling. It's like saying घर का गहना, the jewelry of the house, selling that. And now that is not considered a good thing to do. So similarly, some people view it in that way. It's a rather emotional response. I mean, it's a company is supposed to make profit. If it is not making profit, then why it should be retained? Something like Air India, why year after year people should bear the cost of equity infusion in it? But then there is a body of opinion that says that government intentionally takes decisions that makes them uncompetitive, that government interferes with their business and management. Therefore, they become unprofitable. Therefore, they start incurring losses. And when they start incurring losses, they sell it. So it's a very heated discussion, very emotional discussion. Without going into the merits of each and every argument on disinvestment, we shall look at what the budget says. Budget has set a 1.7 lakh crore disinvestment target. Previously, higher targets were set. Sometimes they were met and sometimes they were not met. When they are not met, the reason is because there is not right climate to sell a particular asset. For example, government has tried previously to sell Air India, but due to its very high debt level and the insistence of government that look, people should not lose their jobs, there was no buyer that found it attractive. Government then tweaked the conditions, took off some of the debt from its book, and now they have a few buyers. Now there will be the detailed procedure will go on. So often the targets are hit and some often the targets are missed as well. This time they have come up with a strategic disinvestment policy, meaning that they want to be consistent in disinvestment practice, that how, at what pace and to what extent they will disinvest. An IPO of LIC has been announced, watch for it. Now the problem is that LIC and many public sector companies have lost a lot of their market value in recent 5-6 years. There was a media report that says that in last 6 years the stock market has risen by almost 30%, and at the same time PSUs have lost their MCAP by almost same level, by a third in some cases. So even LIC has lost its market value a lot. So it will be interesting to see how its IPO fares. And the reason for this is that, taking money from one pocket and giving into another. Often LIC bought a few public sector companies, and since government was owner of those companies, so government was paid money by LIC. So it was like taking money from one pocket and giving into another. Due to these practices, a lot of public sector banks had NPA problem, and other public sector entities like LIC lost valuation for variety of reasons. The one I just gave. Then they have said that they will disinvest IDBI Bank and 2 more banks. The 2 more banks are not mentioned. Air India, BPCL, Container Corporation of India, Pawan Hans, etc. are to be disinvested. A special purpose vehicle to monetize non-core assets will be created as well. What will happen? Non-core assets, mostly land, etc. So giving, either selling the land or leasing the land, a special purpose vehicle will be created to do that. What the policy, we talked about a policy here, that they have come up with a strategic disinvestment policy. What that policy says, it has identified 4 strategic areas. And it says that in these strategic areas, the number of PSCs will be kept to the minimum. Earlier, they said there will be 2, but the budget says we will keep it at the minimum. And rest of the PSCs in these strategic sectors will be disinvested, and PSCs in non-strategic sectors will be completely disinvestment. And here, what are these? Actually, they don't appear 4. They are just 4 bullet points, but they appear more than 4. Atomic energy, space, defense, transportation, telecom, power, petroleum, coal. Now, how is power and petroleum one sector? I don't know. How transportation and telecom are one sector? Space and defense, very different sectors, though they are linked organically. Atomic energy, different. Banking and insurance, different sectors. Financial services, different. So, they say these are 4 strategic sectors, but they appear more than 10. Anyways, what they are saying, that in these sectors, the number of PSCs, the number of public sector enterprises will be kept at a minimum. That minimum is not defined, and the other PSCs will be disinvested. In non-strategic sectors, government will walk out completely. Any PSC in non-strategic sector will be disinvested, and there is a time frame to do that. Glue grant. Now, the reason I picked it is because there could be a prelims question on this. What is a glue grant? So what the budget says, that there are many cities in India that have all kinds of public sector institutions, research institutions, universities, colleges, etc. And they work on different areas. So what it says, that a formal umbrella structure in 9 cities. It gave the example of Hyderabad, which has around 40 central public institutions that work on research, cutting edge technology, education, etc. They said that 9 cities of umbrella structure will be created so that the select public institutions can have better synergy while also retaining their internal autonomy. A glue grant will be set aside for this purpose. So what is a glue grant? There could be, and it is related to which sector? They might say to adhesive sector, to education sector, to nuclear sector, to power sector. So the answer will be education sector. Then direct tax proposals, corporate tax rate among this The budget says that corporate tax rate is among the lowest in the world. In 2019, government gave a drastic tax cut. Dividend distribution tax was abolished because it was an instance of double taxation. I mean, once you giving a dividend, that you have already paid corporation tax, now you are giving dividend to your shareholders, that is taxed, and then shareholder has to pay income tax. So this is a cascading problem. So they said, no, we have abolished it, now only corporation tax and income tax. Faceless assessment. What is assessment? You file a return, but there are some problems in it, inconsistencies, discrepancies. So an assessment takes place, and there is a lot of scope for discretion here. Discretion creates scope for corruption. So what faceless assessment does is that the revenue officer that assesses your return will not know you, you will not know him, neither his name nor address, which revenue circle he is from. So you could be in Bombay, but someone in Calcutta could be assessing your IT return, and vice versa. The idea is simple: completely paperless, electronic with faceless assessment will reduce corruption. And the budget says that we are extending the faceless assessment to income tax appellate tribunal as well, where everything will happen electronically and any face-to-face interaction will be done via video conferencing only. Increasing rebates for small taxpayers, this has been done. Return filers increased from 3.31 crore to 6.48 crore from 2014 to 2020. This is being touted as an achievement, that look, the number of people who file returns is this. What is not given, that how many of them file nil return, how many actually pay tax, and in which slab they pay tax. Zero coupon bonds. Again, a prelims question could be asked. What is a zero coupon bond? Now we know a coupon is related to debt instruments. You raise debt, coupon. Because see, in pre-electronic era, bonds were issued in the form of coupons. That's why they called coupon bonds. So they are for debt instruments. Now suppose usually a 10-year bond used to have 10 coupons. Each time you pay a coupon and you get interest for that. But that word, though everything is in demat format now, but still those words persist. What zero coupon bonds is that they have no interest payment. Okay, zero. But what they do, they trade at deep discounts. Say a bond is valued at 1000, it will be sold at very sharp discount, say at 700. What is the return? At the maturity, you will get 1000. So that 300 rupees earning is your return. You will not be paid regular interest. In bonds, if it's a 10-year bond, each year for each 10 years, some interest is paid and that interest is given on the bond. But in the case of zero coupon bond, no interest is paid. It is sold at a large discount, and when you redeem it at the face value, and that is your earning. Redemption at the face value. This is the face value. Okay, no interest. You bought it in 700, but when you redeem it, you can. So this gap, this 300 is your earning, and meanwhile you can sell it in the market as well. So notified infrastructure debt funds to be eligible to raise funds by issuing efficient zero coupon bonds. That means some infrastructure debt funds will be notified that they are eligible to issue zero coupon bonds. So a prelims question could be asked about the features of zero coupon bonds. Now look, there are many more things in the budget speech, but they are not mentioned here because either they only expand the existing schemes, okay, or they are giving certain facts and figures which are not relevant from exam perspective. Still, I would recommend that you go and at least read the budget speech, okay, so that you get the overall view. So with this, our lecture on union budget is over. Okay, thank you.